All right. Should be working. Make sure that all's good. Awesome. All right. I think we're good. I think that sound is working all right on my end. Excellent. Okay, guys, welcome back. We are back to the Raven's Roost. We're back to a reading stream. Really excited for this. Make sure... Oh, hold on. Pull this up 1 second. There we go. Fix it. All right, we're good. Okay, we're good now. All right, so welcome back, guys. I know that it has been a while since I've done a reading stream. Part of that was because my voice was bad. I had a congested throat, which means that I couldn't speak or do accents or raise or lower my voice much. So I wasn't able to do much reading, but we're back now, and we're going to try to do some reading today. So for those of you who don't know, I'm a writer. I like to write stories and books. I have published 2 stories. One is a very short story called Written Stone. The other is the first draft of my Death Diary series, which I'm currently in the process of rewriting. And I wanted to share some of my stories with you guys. And so here's how I want to do it. In the past, I just kind of read whatever I wanted, and I read a series of different stories in each stream. But I noticed a problem with that. People would join the stream and go like, I have no idea what we're reading. I have no idea where we left off. I don't know what's going on. And that had to be annoying for people who wanted to hear the full story. So I've decided to do the streams a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is, instead of reading a bunch of different stories in one stream, I'm going to dedicate myself to reading one story per stream. And if that means I read like 5 or 6 chapters of a story in one stream, and then in the next stream I have to continue and read the next 5 or 6 chapters, that's what we'll do. And then I'll put them all in a playlist called Raven Reads with their own thumbnails and everything. And that way everyone can know, okay, so if I want to hear Monster Club chapters 1 through 6, I will go to this video and I will get chapters 1 through 6 in this video. So that is my plan. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to test that out today. But today's going to be a little interesting. We are going to be reading, as you saw in the title, the Edenite Chronicles. The Edenite Chronicles is a story that I started writing probably about maybe a year ago, maybe a little more than that I started writing them. And what these are is I came up with this idea that I think will be very creative. And also in the description of each of these videos, I will leave a brief description of each story. But the Edenite Chronicles is a story about this. Basically, the year is 2026 or 2027, something like that. And mankind has discovered a giant warp hole or portal right in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle, hovering above this island. And crossing through this warp hole, you enter a brand new world called Eden. Eden is a lot like Earth, except the difference is that there are no humans. The people who make up Eden are all non-human races, like from fantasy and D&D. Elves, dwarves, orcs, goblins, centaurs, dragons, stuff like that. And so they've never heard, they didn't believe humans existed, much like we didn't believe they existed. So now it looks like war is about to happen, but then they decide, you know what, let's try for peace first. We're going to try to intermingle. We're going to do a mutual trade here. Terrans, as they call us, will get to visit Eden, and Edenites, as we call them, will get to visit Terra, and we will go back and forth and kind of learn about one another. And the Edenite Chronicles is an anthology series telling different stories of Edenites and Terrans interacting and meeting and mingling. And tonight I'm going to be reading, my goal is to read all of the Edenite stories that I have. I'm going to try to read all of the Edenite stories that I have tonight. This is not all of them. I'm going to be writing more in the future, but this is what I want to share with you guys. So, here we go. That sounds awesome. Maybe real the story with the Warren and Nobu, maybe? No, I will not read that story to you guys. That story is off limits from here on out. All right. Just a reminder. I just want to make this reminder, since this was brought up. These streams are purely meant for storytelling. That's their goal. That's what I want to do with these stories, with these streams. So we're not talking For Honor. I know that the For Honor Warriors Den is tomorrow. We're not talking about For Honor. We're not talking Dead by Daylight. We're not talking gaming. That's all for other streams. I talk about gaming and history and all that stuff in lots of other videos and lots of other streams. These streams are specifically meant for reading and storytelling. If you have questions about a story or questions about writing, that we can talk about. But questions about, hey, Raven, what do you think about the new season of For Honor? No, we don't do that here. We don't do that here. Okay? All right. So, let's do it. We're going to start off tonight with the very first story called Lamia Love. Pretty obvious title, but here we go. Lamia Love, written May 6, 2023. James walked through the city, hands stuffed in his pockets and his head down, eyes focused dead ahead towards the diner at the end of the street. It was late. In fact, it was close to midnight. James knew that he would probably be in bed in his apartment, but he couldn't. He didn't want to sleep right now. He needed some relief. He stepped into the diner and glanced at the sign by the door. All races welcome. He smirked to himself at the sign. That sign wouldn't have been necessary 5 years ago, back when everything was normal, before the conjunction. 5 years ago, mankind discovered a mirror world hidden behind a veil somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. This dimension was not home to humans, but rather to creatures like something out of a fairy tale or RPG. Elves, dwarves, lizard folk, centaurs, minotaurs, harpies, and the list went on. At first, there had been conflict, but the various governments around the world found that perhaps diplomacy would serve things better. Thus, the Conjunction Initiative began, a concerted effort to open our world to theirs for mutual exchange and education. Now these other races could get jobs, lives, and families in this world just as humans could do so in theirs. The conjunction wasn't entirely appreciated by everyone. There were elements around the United States who rose up against it, fearing that these monsters, as they were often degraded to being called, were a threat to the nation and the world at large. The non-humans from this realm were more correctly referred to as Edenites, as they referred to their world as Eden, which opened the way to a lot of theological questions that James really didn't care to dive into. The Edenites were just as distrusting to humanity as humans were to them, and mutual exchange was taking time. Only a handful of shops and stores had actively worked to accommodate these new creatures, and this diner apparently was one of them. James looked around to see if anyone was here. At first he saw only humans sitting at tables, eating and conversing, but careful inspection revealed a few key features that revealed the truth. 3 men were at a booth talking in hushed whispers. All had long hair and fair features, looking just a little too attractive, their hair likely hid behind pointed ears. These were elves. And sitting at the bar with his back to the door was a man whose feet didn't reach the floor, but his hair was so thick and scraggly, James could already imagine the beard that he couldn't see. A dwarf. Everyone else looked human, though. James shrugged, and a hostess led James to a private booth. He sat down and picked up the menu to glance at the food. James wasn't all that hungry, but he needed to take his mind off the day. It had all gone so smooth. He'd been all set for a promotion at work. He'd done everything he was supposed to do, and he was excited to get that pay raise. But then Becky had to go and ruin it all. James worked at an accounting office, and there was an opening to move up to the executive board. James had met all the requirements to move up, and he'd been excited, but his colleague Becky decided to start spreading rumors, and the big one being that James was a racist. It wasn't true, of course. James didn't hate any race. But he had been active on Twitter back in college. When the initial conflict between Edenites and humanity kicked off and war was on the horizon, James had made a few offhand comments about the semi-human mongrels and how he wouldn't mind kicking their degenerate monster asses back to the isekai book they crawled out of. He certainly hadn't been alone in those sentiments. It was a different time, and everyone was afraid of a war on the horizon, and James was a patriot, his father being a Marine. But Becky had pulled up those tweets to shame James and make him look bad to the board. Now the board was going to vote in 3 days on the new executive board member, and James knew his prospects were grim. He stared at the menu, barely thinking about the food. Maybe it'd be better to get a few drinks and go home. Just as he was about to set down his menu, movement appeared out of the corner of his eye. A figure was moving fast towards him, and he looked up to see a woman standing in front of him. But she wasn't a normal woman. In fact, saying she was standing was a odd statement to make. Her hair was long and silky black, and she had a lightly tanned skin tone, giving a Latino or Middle Eastern complexion. She had beautiful golden yellow eyes with serpent slits for pupils. Her body looked curvaceous and sexy, but it was hidden by a thick blue and black hoodie that she was wearing over it. But below her waist were not a pair of human legs, but a long and large snake tail with black scales like ebony that reflected the lights from the ceiling in lovely waves. Her tail was coiling itself under her so it took up less space in the restaurant aisle. This was a Lamia, a snake woman. She didn't look older than 30, if that. Her hands were fidgeting and her eyes bore into her nervously. She wasn't dressed like a waitress, so who the heck was she? "Excuse me," she asked quickly, her voice slightly accented. Could I sit across from you?" James blinked in surprise. A part of him told him to deny her, to wait for the hostess to sit her. But instead he nodded and she swiftly slithered into the seat, resting her tail against the booth and coiling it under the table. She grabbed the menu from James and began staring at it intently, though she didn't seem interested in ordering anything. It looked more like she was trying to hide behind it. Who are you?" James asked. Crystal," she whispered, not looking up. There was a tinge to her voice that sounded something like fear. "Why do you want to sit with—" "There she is!" James looked up to see 3 men walking in. One was plump, with hairy knuckles and a small beard on his face with brown eyes and sandy hair. The one next to him was black, dreadlocked hair, and half of his face had tattoos that marked him as someone tough and unbothered. The third one was also black, but a little shorter than the last one. One of his eyes was slightly lazy, as if drifting off focus, but that didn't distract from how intimidating he was portraying himself. "Thought you could run out on us, bitch!" Crystal slunk further into the booth as if wanting to break through the restaurant wall and flee. Just go away," she whimpered. "I didn't want any trouble." "Well, you got trouble, don't you?" the lazy-eyed one snarled, walking forward to grab her. "Hey!" I snapped, surprising by my own outburst. I was starting to rise to my feet on shaking knees. The heck was I doing? I was no fighter. I knew I wouldn't stand a chance against these 3. But I also knew I couldn't let this go on. It was wrong. I didn't know what their problem was with Crystal, but seeing how scared she was, I couldn't ignore that either. "Leave the girl alone." "What, she your girlfriend?" the white one asked. "What if she is?" I challenged dangerously. Crystal looked at me in disbelief. Even I was struggling to realize what I was saying. The lazy-eyed one didn't take his hand off Crystal's arm, but his eyes, or rather his good one, was trained on me. "You got yourself a slut for a girlfriend," the taller black one snapped. "Sing was practically throwing herself on us, then bolted out of the blue after taking our money." "And that's not true," Crystal cried. "You shoved money in my face and I tried to—" "You a lying snake!" the white one snapped. "Who the fuck gives a damn what you say?" "Well, I do," I barked. "Lay off!" Finally, Lazy Eye let go of her, and now they were moving towards James. He struck out his chin and tried to look tough, raising his fist, ready to fight and die for this cause he knew nothing about. At least it was better than laying down and taking it. Gentlemen?" There came a voice from behind, and all 5 turned to see a tall man with black hair standing there. He had on a chef's white double-breasted shirt, close-cut black hair, and a shaved face. He looked in his 50s, and he had a cold, unyielding glare to his eyes. "I'll have to ask you 3 men who just came in to leave." "What, you got a problem with customers, shithead?" Lazy Eye challenged. His buddy put a hand on his shoulder to get his attention. He was looking around the diner, and James followed his gaze. The elves and dwarf from earlier were all on their feet, glaring daggers at the 3 men, and a few human patrons were rising as well. They were now outnumbered, and they knew it. "I'm afraid if you don't leave immediately, I'll call the police," the manager said forcefully. "Place sucks anyway. Got a real vermin problem." The tall black one snarled, and he and his buddies skulked off, leaving the restaurant. The manager then turned to James and Crystal with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that. Would you 2 care for a free appetizer for your trouble?" Crystal said nothing, but James nodded. "Yeah, cheese sticks. Sure." The manager walked away, and James found Crystal's yellow eyes looking at him with a gaze of pure wonder. "Why did you say that?" she asked. "Why did you stick up for me?" "Why did you sit in my booth?" James asked. Crystal looked away and placed her hands on the table. "I thought, maybe if I looked like I was here with someone, they'd leave me alone," she suggested. "Well, I volunteered as your boyfriend to just see if I could take their mind off you," James answered. She flushed and looked away. "I'm sorry about that," she whimpered. "What was all that about, anyway?" James asked weakly, still recovering from the shock of it all. Crystal brushed long strands of black hair out of her face and then sighed. "I moved to Terra about 4 months ago," she explained. "I wanted to be a dancer on Broadway or something big, like A performer? She blushed. I kind of like movies ever since I started seeing them, and I want to be a star. Fair aspiration, but it isn't easy, you know. Apparently you need to start small to get noticed, right? So I was looking online and I found a job as a dancer, but it turns out the job was at an exotic strip club. You didn't stay, did you? Well, no. Once I knew what it was, I left. But those 3 guys saw me leaving out the back entrance and thought I was one of the girls who danced. They started asking me for some fun and pushed a bunch of cash at me. I kept telling them to leave me alone, and finally I managed to slither away, she explained. James listened intently, frowning. So why did you come here? He asked. Well, it's a diner. I thought there would be a lot of people here to help me, she replied. I guess you were right. As James spoke, a basket of cheese sticks was brought to them and set at the table. James stared at them passively, but Crystal's eyes seemed to light up. You go ahead, I'm not hungry. Crystal wasted no time snaring 2 in her fingers and munching them happily. Cheese dangled from her lips, and James giggled at how cute she looked eating that way. You act like you're starved. It has been a few days since I ate, she admitted. James' smile faded. Wait, what? Oh, it's no big deal, she said matter-of-factly. It may seem strange to Terrans like you, but Lamia like me can live on only 1 meal a week, so long as the meal's large and rich in nutrients and carbohydrates. Wait, hold on, how is that possible? I asked. As she bit down on another cheese stick, she giggled. Humans like you are warm-blooded, so you can maintain your body temperature internally. That means you can be more active, but it also means you burn more energy than reptiles. Lamia, like me, are cold-blooded, so we use external heat and light to give us energy. That means we don't require nearly as much food as you do to function. So long as I eat well once a week and go all the proper nutrients through it, I can go for a whole while without eating. She said all this with such bravado and smoothness that James wondered if she hadn't rehearsed this explanation. Well, that's definitely unique. Funny. Unique. I thought you might say repulsive, Crystal grumbled. That's what a lot of people think. It's been real hard to get part-time jobs since coming here. Because everyone thinks I'm scary. James started to speak when suddenly the waitress walked over. Her smile was a tad forced as she tried not to look directly at Crystal. Can I take your order? The waitress asked. Crystal went, I'm fine. I thought you said you were... I don't have any money. I didn't take what those jerks gave me, and I dropped my purse while getting away, she explained. James looked at her sadly and then gave a smile. I'll pay for it, he offered. No, you can't do that. I can and I will. Just order. Crystal's stomach growled loudly and she bit her lip before finally consenting and ordering. She ordered enough for 3 people. A quesadilla, a plate of spaghetti with extra meatballs, a pot roast over rice, all with sides of mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, dumplings. James doubted her ability to eat it all, but as the meal went on, he watched in amazement as she consumed it all with relative ease, only stopping occasionally to sigh with content. Won't you eat something? She asked as she wrapped up her pot roast and was now attacking the dumplings. I'm not very hungry, James said. I only came here to just get away and think. Crystal paused, eating to look at him. What's wrong? It's nothing. Hey, you help me, she insisted. The least I can do is help you if I can. Well, that's the thing, James lamented. I don't think you can. There's nothing you can do. Try me, she urged, swallowing her dumpling. James sighed and began to tell her everything. About his job at the accountant office, about the promotion and his goals, about Becky and his rivalry with her, about his tweets from his younger days as well, and he fully expected her to bristle at that, but she didn't flinch, merely listened to everything being said. And when James finished speaking, she set down her fork and leaned on the table, her head in her hand. So, you're worried that if the board thinks you're a racist, you'll be denied a promotion? She asked. At the very least, James said. Becky's already showed them the tweets, and I'm surprised you're not offended by them. Are you kidding? She laughed. The propaganda Eden threw around about you Terrans was way worse than that. If anything, what you wrote was modest. I've been called worse since being here. Trust me, I'm not offended. James smiled, glad she wasn't upset. And besides, if you really felt that way about me and Edenites in general, you wouldn't have helped me back there. She went back to eating, and James contemplated her words. It was true. He had helped her. And James certainly didn't hate her. Those tweets had been in the immature responses to an upcoming war, not a truly heartfelt hatred. When she finished eating, she set the plates aside, and James reached for his wallet to pay for it. Crystal watched him a moment and then gave a soft smile. What did you say your name was again? She asked. James laughed, realizing that in all the excitement he hadn't even introduced himself. Sorry, I'm James, he answered. James? I'd like to help you if I could, she said. All right, how? James asked. She grinned wider. I'd like to be your girlfriend. This was not the answer James had expected, and he found himself dropping the pen he'd been using to sign the check. He looked at her in shock, and her smile never once faded. You're joking. I'm not. I promise, she urged. All you have to do is prove you're not a racist to the company, right? Okay, if we're dating, it'd be pretty hard to say you're a racist now, wouldn't it? James shook his head. That's not going to be enough, James sighed. They'll just argue I'm paying you to play a role or something. Crystal's smile softened somewhat and she looked down at the table as dirty plates were removed. You don't know much about Lamia, do you? She asked. James didn't answer before she continued. Look, even among Edenites, we're not very liked because of our snake qualities. We're seen as dangerous and some people think even evil. We are discriminated against far more than the Edenites who are more human qualities. I'm sorry about that, James tried to reason. But, hold on, that's exactly why this will work out for you, Crystal continued. I'm going to show up at work tomorrow to bring you lunch. You'll what? I'll let everyone know I'm your girlfriend. They'll be terrified by me. They'll be disgusted by the very sight of me. But they'll feel guilty for that. The more they subconsciously feel afraid of me, the more they'll overcompensate to appear unbiased or tolerant. Terrans always overcompensate to hide their faults. They'll definitely ignore your past tweets just to keep from exposing how scared they are of me. Oh no, we aren't afraid of this scary snake lady. We like her. In fact, we like her so much, let's promote her boyfriend. The idea was so silly that James burst out laughing and stood up from the booth. You have a safe trip home, James answered curtly. Well, wait! She jumped up and slithered after him, following James out of the restaurant. When James reached the parking lot, she slithered around to face him, stopping him. I'm trying to help you here. I don't want that help, James snapped, looking away from her. You want to manipulate my employers for my benefit. Oh, I'm sorry, but isn't that exactly what Becky did to you? But at your expense, James shouted. You want to portray yourself as a monster and a freak just to guilt my bosses into giving you a promotion? Well, that's degrading, and I won't let you do it. Crystal's eyes widened and she lowered herself slightly, deflating. Wait, that's what you think this is? She asked. Well, what else can you call it? You're making yourself into a spectacle to help me, and if that's what it takes to get the promotion, then I don't want it. You're not just an Edenite or a Lamia. You're a woman, and I don't want any woman to flaunt herself for my benefit. Crystal looked down at the ground and then nodded her head. You know, you are a really kind person, James. You really care that much about me. She then reached out and took James's hand, lifting it slightly. But James, this is what I want to do. It's not flaunting my monster qualities. It's doing something kind for my boyfriend. Just like what you did for me. You'll be stared at. Ridiculed. I already am. It may not even work. Well, maybe not, but it can't hurt either. It would hurt you. Guess what, James? I'm a big girl. I'm not going to break down that easily. James, the worst thing you could do here is sabotage yourself by not letting me at least try. James stared at her for a long moment and then sighed. I feel like I'm going to regret this. James was sitting at his desk, reading through a few files on his computer, when suddenly his phone rang from the front desk. He answered and heard a rather shaking voice on the other end. You have a visitor? I'll send them up, James answered, hiding a smile. She'd come after all. It took 5 minutes for Crystal to make her way up from the elevator to the third floor. James looked up to watch her slither towards him. She was carrying a bag in one hand, and she was wearing a white blouse and a red sweater over it, open to reveal her blouse. Her makeup was done, and she had a skirt that hung down slightly that swished as she moved along the office aisle. Every person in the office was staring, almost open-mouthed at her, and James had to stifle a snicker as she weaved around onlookers with grace. She reached the desk and set the bag down beside him. I brought lunch, James. I made it myself. Did you make enough for both of us? James asked. She winked. I think I ate enough last night for a while. I'd like you to eat for a change. James' eyes drifted from her to the woman standing by the water dispenser, her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Her patchy blonde hair draped her face, and her pointed nose looked just a little too long for her face. She was a rather skinny woman, but not very appealing, taking on an almost rodent-like quality. Becky clearly was not expecting this, and that was almost reward enough. He couldn't resist digging it in a little. Hey, Becky, you're wasting the water, he called. Becky squeaked as she realized she was pushing the water switch too long and let it go. Crystal looked up at her and grinned at the mousy-haired woman. Wait, she's the one giving you trouble? She whispered. Huh, and they call me unappealing. James couldn't hold back the snorting laughter at that and scooted his chair aside to make room for her to join him. As she adjusted her long body, another figure entered the room. His name was Mr. Jenkins. He was on the board and was also Becky and James's boss. What's all the commotion? What's going... He froze at the sight of Crystal, but quickly tried to force himself to behave naturally. I see you have a visitor today, James. Yeah, this is Crystal. She's my girlfriend. Crystal rose herself up from her seat to go to Mr. Jenkins. She held out her hand, and it was all he could do to maintain a smile as he took it and shook. You must be James's boss. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, ma'am.
James speaks very highly of you, she added. I know he loves working here, and I'm so glad he has such good people working with him. James smiled, watching her play a very convincing role, and yet he wondered how much of it was an act and how much of it was genuine. She probably didn't know all that much about his work or who he worked with, but Crystal clearly cared a great deal about James and was willing to play this game for him.
Well, I'm glad to see James has such a beautiful girlfriend who supports him here.
Oh, I definitely want to see him succeed, she agreed. I hope it doesn't bother you that he's dating an Edenite.
No! Jenkins answered a little too quickly. No, not at all. It's fantastic. We don't have any issues with that.
Well, I'm glad, Crystal beamed after slithering back to James's side and smiling, because he means a lot to me. And that, James knew, was very genuine. All right, and that was Lamia Love story. Let me get something to drink real quick. I'll be right back. You can let me know your thoughts while I get set up for the next one. That feels better. Throat still isn't 100%, but it's good enough to read. All right. Next story. A Classroom of Monsters, written May 9th, 2023. One word of advice. No matter what your degree or how many years you take in college, you will never be ready for the students you're going to teach. The truth is that no amount of training, educational theory, or class time will be enough to prep you for the unique classroom that you will be given. You will be put into a classroom full of students, most of whom do not care about you or what you have to say, and only a handful will actually try. You'll try to be friends with the kids. You'll be their pal. You'll give a little slack and encouragement, and in exchange, the students will start to walk all over you, ignoring your instructions and requests and direction. So you have to harden up and start enforcing discipline. Now they think you're a tyrant and being unfair. Now you're the mean teacher. You're the unfair teacher. You begin to care less and less about the students or the class or your own subject. You begin to beg for the last day of school so you can slam the door and hope it hits a few of those brats on the way out. No, I'm not bitter. Why do you ask? Joking aside, what I just described to you was my first 2 years of teaching English in high school. By my third year, I'd gotten more or less used to the way things were meant to roll, and I developed my system. I will say that teaching starts to gain more natural as time goes on. You figure out what works and what doesn't. And while I'm not necessarily the super fun buddy teacher that I hoped I would be, I wasn't necessarily a tyrant either. I found a comfortable middle ground from trial and error. I felt more confident as a teacher. That is, until I moved. I'd been in need of the move for a while, of course, and I ended up moving from Tennessee to Georgia. A new high school, a new set of students, but also a new world. See, the school I was going to was Montresor High School, MHS for short. MHS was unique as it had been chosen as a school for integrating Edenite families, earning MHS a new title, Monster High School. When explorers discovered a new dimension hidden in the fogs of the Bermuda Triangle, humanity discovered Eden, a world of non-humans like elves, dwarves, centaurs, mermaids, and harpies. War was expected as our cultures clashed, but after some tension and uncertainty, peace was arranged, and soon intercultural exchange began to occur. Edenites, the non-human peoples of Eden, were now seeking to explore our world and technology, while humanity was excited to explore Eden. That, of course, meant some Edenites would go to human schools. Not all schools were open to it, but MHS certainly was. I was informed that the sophomore class I'd be teaching would be about a third Edenite. I hadn't been sure how to feel about that, and to say I was nervous was something of an understatement. But as I said, you're never truly prepared, no matter how much prep work you do. So I accepted the inevitable and prepared for the next day. First block was actually all human, a bunch of sophomores who felt kind of full of themselves and satisfied to be able to tease freshmen now. They didn't keep that up long in my class. I laid down my rules, I got the class started as simply and naturally as I could, and things seemed to go over well. But second block, I got my first Edenite students. a merman in a wheelchair named Eric, a blonde-headed harpy girl named Haley, and a dwarf who already had a full beard named Troy. I admit I was taken aback by them, and I wasn't the only ones. Many of the human students in class couldn't stop staring at them, and I found it hard to blame them. Troy never made eye contact with anyone as his feet dangled from the desk chair. Haley seemed a bit oblivious to it all, just all smiles and answering any questions that she was asked. She struck me as something of a bimbo or airhead, but to my surprise, she wasn't nearly as dumb as her personality indicated. She could even name 2 plays by Shakespeare besides Romeo and Juliet, which even some of my human students couldn't do. As for Eric, he was very quiet. I got the sense that he wished he wasn't as visible. He kept brushing his brown locks behind his ears and looking away from everyone. Troy didn't meet anyone's gazes, partly because he was just uninterested in conversation, but Eric, I could tell, was scared of something. I wanted to find out what, but that could wait. I had planning for 3rd block, and then 4th block, the last block of the day. I had probably the most interesting students. This time, I had 5 Edenite students. 2 of them were elves, both boys, David and Alistair. Both had very long golden hair and pointed ears that stuck out from it. They even wore similar clothes, and for a moment I thought they might have been brothers, but it turns out no, they were in fact cousins. The 3rd was a tall, mature-looking girl with gray hair and blue eyes. She had a dog tail and ears that matched. I would later learn she was something called an Inu, I was told, but I didn't know for sure. All I know is she's some kind of dog, and that was meant to be Andrea. The 4th was an actual minotaur. He had a bull's head and everything, though his horns weren't fully in. His name was Freddy, and to my surprise, he was actually a very shy young man, mostly keeping to himself and not speaking much. But the last one to join was probably the most frightening. Walking in on 8 long spiny legs, but with a long scorpion tail, she wore a black shirt that matched her carapace lower body. It was like someone had cut a high school girl's legs off and glued the torso to the head of a scorpion the size of a small car. Her name was Rebecca, and if Freddie and Eric were nervous and shy, she was mortified. I actually heard her coming before she showed up, as I could hear gasps and small screams when she entered the room. Her black hair masked part of her face, and her eyes shimmered with tears behind her glasses. I felt a mix of revulsion, but also pity. She later told me that she was something called a Gertablilu. I was swiftly beginning to realize I was very out of my element. Even so, I did what I could to make the class run smoothly. The days turned to weeks, but by the end of week 2, I realized there was something wrong. 1st block was doing fine, or as fine as I expected them to, but 2nd and 4th block were apparently having trouble. Grades were dropping for the Edenite children especially, and there were more and more reports of verbal harassment and bullying. There's always a little teasing among kids, you get used to that, but this felt unusually harsh. Apparently one student had stolen Troy's backpack and played a few rounds of keep away. Troney had kicked in a fight broke out. In the aftermath of the fight, Eric, who had been a bystander, was knocked from his wheelchair and nearly trampled. It took the SRO and 2 teachers to stop the fight. Several Edenite parents were worried about the state of things at the school, and I didn't blame them. They wanted another Edenite educating their children, but we only had one Edenite educator, and I hadn't met her yet, so that was out of the question. Something had to be done, and done soon. 2 days after that very fight, I was packing my stuff to head home at the end of the day when I heard noises. Someone was crying. I wandered towards the sound and made my way to the other side of the hallway to the guidance counselor's office. I knocked politely and opened up to see what was going on. There I saw perhaps the most bizarre sight yet. There was Rebecca, the Gertablilu, curled up in the corner and sobbing into her hands, her long legs tucked up under her, and in a wheelchair near her was Eric, and on the other side was Andrea, the dog girl, both of whom were gazing at her with expressions of both concern and despair. "Excuse me." I spun at the sound of the voice and saw a woman standing by the door. She had on a professional attire suit, heels, and her arms were crossed as she glanced at me from behind sunglasses that looked out of place indoors. Until I saw that instead of hair, she had writhing, wriggling snakes all over her head and shoulders, making it seem as if her hair was actually alive. I stifled a shout, though my widening eyes were quite apparent. Excuse me. "Are you one of the teachers?" she asked. "He's Mr. Gresset," Eric spoke up, noticing me. "He's our English teacher." Hearing that seemed to calm the Gorgon lady down. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Smith. I'm the new school guidance counselor." We haven't met," I admitted, stupidly shaking her hand. She gave an apologetic smile. "Well, that's largely my fault. I only just started 2 days ago. A little late, I know, but moving was a bit tricky from Eden," she admitted.
So you're an Edenite too?
I realized just how stupid I sounded asking that question. No, I just think snakes on my scalp is the latest fashion trend, she smirked,
Giving me a look that made me groan. Admittedly, I walked into that jab. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but, what's going on? The teasing expression left her when she turned back to the children.
It would seem that Rebecca's been getting bullied. A lot. It's the same guys, Andrea snarled, sounding like the dog she resembled. It's Philip, Nishan, and Isaiah.
I thought on the two names. I didn't know Philip or Nishan, but I knew Isaiah. He was in my first block class. His grades were below average, and he usually did nothing but sit around and do nothing at all, looking for excuses to cut class. Yeah, he struck me as the type to bully. What did they do? I asked. Rebecca shook her head without answering. You don't have to tell me, I just want to understand the situation.
It happened on the bus loop, Eric explained. Andrea nodded and pulled out a torn-up pile of yellow tape.
I took it and unraveled it to see that it said, Toxic do not cross.
They threw this all over her, shouting and laughing about her being a poisonous bug, Andrea hissed.
I frowned and threw the tape aside and knelt down in front of Rebecca, who was still sobbing. Rebecca, how are you getting home? The bus has left.
I called her mother, Elizabeth answered. Until then, she's waiting here.
What about you two? I asked Andrea and Eric.
Well, I have volleyball practice, Andrea said. I did, but I don't want to leave Rebecca like this.
I'm waiting on Dad to get me, Eric answered. I nodded and looked at Rebecca firmly. After a few moments, she looked at me. Her glasses were off, and I could tell she was still on the verge of another crying fit. All right. Rebecca, I want you to talk to your mom about your grades in my class. The whole room stared at us a moment. Even Rebecca looked confused.
What?
She hiccuped. You didn't do great on your last quiz. We need to talk about extra credit work, I whispered. A thought started growing in my mind. So when your mom gets here, don't leave. Go to my classroom and wait for me there, all right?
Mr. Gresset, Elizabeth asked, looking at me in surprise.
Then the three of you need to get going. Andrea, don't miss volleyball for this. And Eric, make sure Rebecca gets to my office. Crying time's over. Let's go. They all stared at me unmoving, but the crying had stopped. Did I stutter? I asked.
No, sir,
they answered. It was the trained response. Anytime I said the phrase, did I stutter, it was a sign that they needed to get active. Andrea gave Rebecca a hug and then ran off with her bag to the gym. Eric waited for Rebecca to get up, and then I watched her wheel him out of the office and towards the front desk. I stayed behind with Elizabeth, who looked a little annoyed.
I don't think that was wise, Mr. Gresset.
Letting her sit here in a dark room to cry her eyes out around her friends wasn't going to help her, I answered simply.
Oh, and you're a psychologist now?
No, but I've been teaching a while. When girls get bullied and have a fit, letting them wallow in it for too long will only make them become addicted to the pity party. She needs to pick herself up, I replied.
What she needs are her friends. She needs to know that there are people who don't see her as a dangerous freak, Elizabeth snapped.
I agree, I answered, but this isn't the place to do it. Especially not right after that treatment the boys gave her, so I have a proposition. Elizabeth placed her hands on her hips, her snake hair writhing a little.
I'm listening.
Let's start an after-school program for the Edenites, I offered. It can be once or twice a week. They can even meet in my room.
I'm sorry, what?
It's clear the Edenites aren't getting along well with the human kids, and their school life is suffering due to bullying and self-esteem issues. We need them to feel comfortable again. If they can feel like they aren't alone and can have people to talk to listen with, then they can better handle their situation with them.
That's a lovely thought, but it's not the point of what we're trying to accomplish, Elizabeth sighed. The goal of the exchange program is for Edenites to grow more used to human society.
And they're children, I practically shouted. You can't expect a child to just naturally get used to a new environment right off the bat without any warning or explanation. They're in a world they barely know, surrounded by kids who feel inadequate themselves, so are now lashing out at them because it's easier. I know they need to learn to adapt, but if they're going to survive at all, they need to lean on each other.
So you just want all the Edenite students to meet in your room after school once a week? And what will you do?
I'll bring snacks, and they can do whatever they want. Play board games, tell stories, whatever. These kids, they need the socialization. It will keep them sane long enough to learn how to survive, I argued.
Elizabeth crossed her arms and looked down at the ground, tapping her heel a few times and biting her lip. I don't know about this. It does sound nice, but you're not an Edenite yourself. How can you relate to these kids?
I looked at her a long moment and then placed my hands in my pockets. You don't have to be from Eden to be called a freak, I confessed. I was teased a lot too. Because lots of normal human kids are. But what helped me was getting involved in clubs and sports and things that kept me going. Sure, I'm not an Edenite. I'm human, but I get what it feels like to be left out. I've lived it and seen it enough to know.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth finally sighed. I feel like I've been a little unfair to you in all this. Don't worry about it. I have a request, if I may, she asked. I'd like to sit in on these school meetings with you, if you get permission to do them from the principal. Perhaps having an adult Edenite there will help.
I nodded my approval. Well, now we just have to convince Principal Hardy.
I'll leave that to me, Elizabeth shrugged. If I say it's in the best interest for the Edenite students, he'll listen.
I finally made my way to the classroom to see Rebecca already inside with her mother, who looked remarkably like her, only much older, probably in her mid-early 40s. She had a very worried expression. There were flecks of gray on some of her strands of dark hair.
Oh, Mr. Gresset, she asked. I'm sorry my daughter hasn't been doing her best, and...
I know, I interrupted. I actually wanted to speak with you about her grades, but before we get into that, I want to ask you a question. My eyes fell on Rebecca, and I smiled warmly. Would you like to be part of a little after-school program we're starting? Edenite exclusive. I said it before, and I'll say it again. No matter what your degree or how many years you take in college, you will never be ready for the students you're going to teach and help. All right, and that's the end of that one. Give me a second, get something to drink. Next story. This is a two-part story called The Queen of Bees. Here we go. In the world of Eden, the Edenites lived under 7 different monarchs that ruled over different provinces and territories. One of these provinces, more discreet than the others, was the land of Melfera, also called the Golden Kingdom, or the Land of Honey. Melfera is the home of the race known as the Apissara, a race of insect humanoids that bear close resemblance in relation to honeybees. Their society works very similar to that of real-world bees, and it is the initiative of human society beyond Eden to study and understand them better. All 7 Edenite monarchs were invited to visit the human world and tour its countries and lands, but only 4 agreed to go. The other 3 refused for reasons of their own. However, Queen Melody Theodorax IV, the reigning Apissara monarch, had extended a counter-offer that a single diplomat or ambassador may be allowed admittance to her queendom in the spring. This was agreed to, and now on the second day of the springtime for Eden, a young man in his early 30s is making his way to the Golden Kingdom. As he passes through the dark woods, he spies the glints of honey gold ahead of him through the breaks in the tree line, and he hears a distinct humming sound coming from the city. As he passed the forest line, he saw it. The great golden walls of Melfera. To say it was massive was an understatement. The great walls stood almost 20 meters tall, and they were golden brown. They appeared sturdy, but the structure did not appear to be stone or concrete. Beyond the walls, the ambassador could see large, dome-like structures rising all about, all golden or yellow in various shades. Some stood so high that even their entrances could be seen over the walls, while others were so small that only the tips of these buildings were visible. But all about he saw the denizens of this land. They flew about the air, passing each other in midair as if cars on a busy highway, and though he couldn't make out their features well, he could see their resemblance to bees. As he got closer to the front gates, though, 2 Apissara soldiers suddenly flew from the wall and down to earth, spears in hand. He jumped back as he took them in. They were as tall as he was, golden yellow in color with black markings that contrasted them. The markings were slightly different from each, and he wondered if perhaps black markings on Apissara were like fingerprints on a human. No one making it quite the same. Both had feminine proportions, so he assumed them to be women. He was no insect expert per se, but he'd heard somewhere that most bees of a hive were female, so he assumed this was the case. They wore armor over their chests and helmets that only revealed their round ovular eyes and their lower mouth, which looked relatively normal, save for a single line running through the lower lip to the chin, which he wasn't sure what the function of was. They had large abdomens and jutted out from their rears, and on the tips of these were small 9-inch long dart-like stingers that he knew could be fatal. The women had 4 arms and 2 legs, all of which were black in color and segmented like insect legs, though the hands and feet, while clawed, were certainly equipped with 3 fingers apiece. "State your business," the first warrior snapped. The voice was female, so the ambassador breathed a sigh of relief. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an ID he'd been given by the United Nations. I'm Ambassador Jake Coward. I'm here to meet the Queen Melody Theodorax for a diplomatic conference. She scheduled our meeting today. The soldiers eyed each other, and then one closed his eyes and began twitching the antenna she had sprouted from her head. After a few moments, she nodded. Yes, sorry. Had to verify. The Queen is expecting you. They lowered their spears and walked back to the gate, pushing it open for Jake. He smiled and nodded to them both. Thank you very much. The two women nodded at him, and he walked into the city. I'm sorry, but what is it? The soldier to his left asked. I'm afraid I don't know the way to the palace, Jake admitted. Could one of you ladies... Not our job, the other one said curtly. She pointed to the road leading forward. Follow the main road. You'll see signs showing the way. Large structure in the city. You can't miss it. Jake nodded quickly. Thank you. He smiled and hurried away to the city. It was like walking through a city made of honeycomb and golden stone. The streets were paved in gold and waxy substance that made it soft yet firm enough to walk on. Every city was dome-shaped, and Jake noticed that despite the diversity in height and size, they all seemed to bear one of a handful of functions. Some looked primarily meant for food or its creation. Some were training grounds where he could see soldiers like the ones he'd met running through drills and combat training. And then some seemed to be living quarters like apartments. Doors on the bottom were seldom used, as many citizens just flew to a window and crawled in. Jake was so caught up staring and watching, he nearly bumped into a woman carrying a large box. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon, he cried. She looked at him in surprise. Unlike the soldiers up front, she wore a jumpsuit of some kind, marked with black lining over a white overall color. She picked up her box again. Who are you? She asked. Ambassador Jake Coward, he answered, just smiling. Oh, yes, the Terran. She nodded and continued walking, and Jake turned after her. Miss! She paused a moment to look back, her long black hair bouncing as she did this. Is this the right way to the palace? Yes, she answered, and then turned back to her work. Jake frowned a little. She was just as curt as the soldiers had been. Were these people being rude to him because he was a human? He was starting to feel uneasy. He suddenly hit him that none of the Apisarans he passed seemed to notice or care that he was there, despite this being their first time ever seeing a Terran. It was as if they had no other concern outside of whatever it was they were doing. And after a long walk, he finally reached the largest structure there was, a great golden palace that seemed to drip with austerity. The doors to it were large and incredible, and there were various windows and doors on the walls that Apisara flew in and out of like it was a large airport. Going to the door, he pushed it open and strolled inside. In the main hall, Apisara bustled about, carrying boxes like the one he'd seen earlier, and also bundles of cloth. He looked and noticed a few scaling the walls of the interior, rubbing wax-like material on blemishes in the surface. He moved silently through the crowd, wondering how he was going to find the queen in all this, when suddenly a segmented hand grabbed his arm. He spun to see another female Apisara standing beside him, her hair black with silver strands and a weary face. She wore a toga of some sort that showed she was a little plump but still feminine. Are you, by any chance, Ambassador Coward? I am, I answered. I am Priscilla. I am Queen Melody's attendant. She's waiting for you in the throne room. Walk with me. Satisfied that he now had someone to tail, he followed after the bobbing abdomen of Priscilla. She said little, and turned him through various hallways and doors, until she finally stopped at a large black door with golden embroidery along the edges. Without preamble, Priscilla pushed open the door and bowed. There, Jake got his first look at the queen. She sat on a large cushioned throne. Her abdomen was far larger than any of the other Apisara had seen. Her body was matronly, having a mature look, making him realize that all the other citizens he'd seen so far seemed somehow youthful or young in comparison. Not that she looked elderly like Priscilla, her body was curvaceous and tight, with large and prominent breasts that she hid behind a white gown with golden etched engravings and embroidery in the fabric. Atop her head was a crown adorning her long honey-colored hair that tied back behind her. Her large ovular eyes turned to notice him, and her head lifted slightly, revealing a fur-like collar around her neck that looked somehow regal. Her wings fluttered a bit, and she rose to her feet, standing almost a head taller than any other Apisara. She approached and smiled politely. Greetings, Ambassador. I am Queen Melody Theodorax IV, the sovereign queen of Melfera. Her voice was smooth and soft, yet mature. She carried an air to her that felt almost motherly. James bowed politely. Your Majesty, I am Jake Coward. It's an honor to finally meet you. The honor is mine, truly, she smiled. I have been most excited for your visit, Ambassador. Did you come alone? I expected an entourage. No, Your Highness, Jake admitted. The United Nations felt it would be unwise to send too large a group to a land unaccustomed to humans. It might make you nervous. The Queen chuckled at that. I say your caution is admirable, but highly unnecessary. My children wouldn't have cared in the least. I thought back to how the Apasara had mostly ignored me, or just been short or curt with me. As if reading my thoughts, her antennae wiggled gently and she bowed her head slightly. My children are, sadly, not quite as abstract thinkers as you or I. The majority are born with jobs to do, and performing them is their only concern. Strangers are little more than an afterthought. Had you been a threat, however, every one of them would have taken notice, I assure you.
You refer to them as your children, Jake noted curiously. Is that literal or metaphorical?
Literal, actually, the queen giggled. Indeed, it may seem strange to Terrans like yourself, but Apissara queens are the sole progenitors of our kind. When a queen comes of age, she begins mating immediately with her drones so that she can begin producing offspring. All the citizens of this kingdom are my children, with only a few exceptions who were born before I became queen. They are, therefore, my siblings, as they are children of my late mother, the former queen of Malfara.
Jake's eyes widened. He had assumed, but it still felt impossible that this woman could possibly be the birth mother of an entire nation. How is that possible, Jake asked. I don't mean any disrespect. It's just...
It's quite all right, she interrupted. There's much to discuss and do. I shall give you a tour of the palace. Then I have prepared a feast for your arrival, after which a room has been prepared for you to stay. How long do you plan to be with us?
Jake blinked several times at all she'd said. I hadn't planned long. Perhaps a night?
There's no need to be so reserved, Mr. Coward. You are welcome here as long as you like.
She then turned and waved towards the throne.
Shall I show you around?
Please, Jake said anxiously, tailing after the queen. She walked to her throne and touched the arm of it, smiling pleasantly.
My throne is not just the seat of my power. It is also where I lay my eggs.
She pointed to the floor around the feet of the throne, which Jake noticed were covered in cushions.
Around 3 times a week I will begin laying eggs here, usually around a few dozen or so a week, and the nursing caste will be there with me to immediately take the eggs to the appropriate nursery facility.
Nursery caste?
In Apissara society, the queen explained, the people are divided into different social groups. The nursing caste who tend to the offspring I produce and help to raise them, the worker caste who construct and repair the city and its defenses, the foraging caste who gather and prepare food and supplies beyond our walls, the soldier caste who protect the city from enemies and go to war when needed, and the drone caste, the males who serve as my partners for reproduction.
So all males are drones?
Indeed. I understand in the human world males and females are of similar numbers to each other, but in Apissara society, males make up about a 25th of the population. They are exceedingly rare, and thus all males are a part of the drone caste, so that I will never be without someone to mate with.
Jake shuddered at the thought of only living to be a sex slave to the queen, but shook that worry aside. The queen giggled again as if reading his mind. She then clapped her hands together, and from out of a nearby curtained door frame a figure appeared. It was an Apissara, but he was built more broadly. His body was toned and built than the others. He had a large abdomen, but not like the queen's, and his hair was black and short. He was also shirtless, exposing his bare chest. He dropped to one knee and bowed. Your Highness.
This, ambassador, is one of my drones, Darren. Do not assume he's merely a slave to me. The drones are born for the purpose of pleasing their queen and helping her to reproduce for the queendom.
Jake looked at Darren and then to the queen. So then, only the queen can mate? Jane asked.
Oh, heavens no, the queen laughed. Any of my daughters can mate with a drone if they wish, but most don't. For one thing, they can't reproduce offspring. Only I can do that. And secondly, as I said, most of my daughters aren't very abstract thinkers, concerning themselves only with day-to-day work and toil. Most don't have the time or drive to think about sexual pleasures.
She turned to Darren.
You may go, Darren. I shall call on you another night.
Yes, Your Highness. And the drone turned and sprinted back down the curtain. Jake watched him go and then looked to the queen. Okay, so you mate with the drones, then lay eggs, and those eggs are taken to the nursery facilities?
Different facilities around the city will raise the children to the needs required. For example, if the queendom is at war, I will lay more eggs to fill the soldier caste role, and thus the babies will be taken to that facility for the proper training and upbringing. If the city is going through a famine or disaster, I will lay more eggs for the foraging caste.
Do you control which caste type you'll lay?
Not quite, the queen shrugged. Mostly I just produce the offspring. The nursery caste keep track of where work is needed and where we are low on certain caste members. They will then take the babies to the necessary location and feed them and raise them to be part of that caste.
The queen started to walk down a hallway behind the throne as Jake followed.
This hall leads to an exit where the nursing caste goes in and out carrying the eggs. The path will fork and lead to various facilities. Jake listened to her talk, picturing all of this and feeling somewhat horrified. It felt like some kind of communist utopia, a world where people were born and raised to do one thing their whole lives, with only the queen and her attendants having any real autonomy. The queen frowned and looked down at him. "What is communism?" she asked. Jake winced at the question. "What?" "Your mind. I can read some of your surface-level thoughts," she answered. I didn't know you could do that. I'm sorry." "It's quite all right," she explained. "Our antennae can pick up subtle vibrations and pheromones in others. Only I can actually interpret them as thoughts, though again, only at the surface level."
Well, and to answer your question, communism is a form of government from the human world. It feels similar to what your society is like. A strong dictator at the head of the government. All that is produced is shared among the society. People are born with roles to play, unable to dream or pursue goals beyond the demands of the government.
"The society of Apisara cannot work with any other race I know," Queen Melody explained. "Apisara, by their nature, are single-minded creatures. They do not dream or aspire beyond their role. When an Apisara is born, they are fed the nectar of their facility, and then their only job from then on is to support the city as best they can according to their role. But this way of life cannot work for a race with more than single-minded thinking and aspirations. Humans like yourself, elves, dwarves, lizardmen, and so on. They are all not simple-minded. They all function and feel and think individually from the society. But my children live to support me, live to protect my country, and so that is all they desire. To your people, I suppose it is something abhorrent to consider, but for our race, it is all we know. I pray you do not judge us harshly for this."
Jake turned quickly, holding up his hands. No, that was not my intention. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to insult you.
"I know this," the queen smiled. "You seem a polite man. You, of course, have your personal issues, and I do not blame you for them. That is why I wanted to see you for myself and to show you my queendom, to understand why our culture works and our ways."
"So that's why you declined the invitation of the 7 monarchs?"
"One of the reasons," she admitted. "But the other reason is that I can't be too far from my kingdom. Like I said, I lay eggs 3 to 4 times a week. It wouldn't do to spend a month or two touring your world when I'm needed to lay eggs."
"True, but, no offense, but couldn't you take a few weeks off?" Jake asked. The queen chuckled.
"I'm afraid not. You see, Apisara lives are very short, usually only about 2 decades or so in length. Queens live much longer, usually around 90 to 100 years, but the average life of an Apisara is relatively short. An egg I lay will hatch a little less than a month after I lay it. The child will become independent of the nursing caste after 2 years, and then they will begin training for their roles, a process that usually only takes a year. After that, they are fully fledged citizens of Melfera. Each year, a fair percentage of my citizens pass away, and thus new subjects must fill their place. That's not even taking into consideration wars with our neighbors or rival kingdoms. You can't imagine the losses that brings us."
"Have, there been many?" Jake asked.
"More than I'd like," she sighed. "And that is why I don't want conflict between humanity and Apisara. I'm open to trade and working with humanity, and in time I will discuss these matters with you further. But for now, let us continue our tour."
The queen led Jake away and through the palace. As Jake followed, he took in her facial expression, was surprised by the stoicism. As an ambassador, he'd met many Edenite peoples and cultures, but none of them quite compared to the Apisara or their queen. Perhaps he would take her up on her offer of a few extra days here. There was so much he wanted to see.
"I'm glad to hear that," she smiled.
What?
"Oh, I'm sorry. Was that thought meant for only yourself?" She winked. "I can be so nosy at times."
And that's part 1 done. Get some more to drink. All right. And now for the sequel, The Queen of Bees, Part 2. Jake stirred from his sleep and inhaled a sweet scent that set his mouth watering. He was reminded of when he was a child and his mother would make biscuits in the morning with honey, and it always filled him with joy and excitement. But as he opened his eyes, though, he was not in his childhood home, nor was he in his house. He was in a large room with golden walls and silk sheets. He sat up and looked around, the memories coming back to him. He glanced out the window to the sight he'd seen yesterday, The Queendom of Melfera, the nation of bee people. The land of Eden was ruled by 7 different monarchies, and Melfera was one of them. When mankind had discovered this world across the rift in dimensions, war with the non-human races of Eden was just narrowly avoided. In an attempt to foster peaceful relations and potential cooperation, the 7 rulers were invited to visit and tour the human world. However, only 4 had agreed. The Queen of Melfera, Queen Melody Theodorax IV, had declined, citing her need to remain with her people. However, as compromise, she had invited an ambassador to come and visit her land instead. This was why Jake was here. He was the delegate sent to visit the land. Yesterday, he met with the Queen and learned a great deal about her and her world. She was a single progenitor of the Apisara, the bee race. All of her children were divided into castes and social groups that dictated how they would live and contribute to the nation, and none questioned their place or truly thought beyond their role. Only the Queen seemed to have any autonomy beyond her station, hence why she had invited Jake to remain in her palace for a longer duration. After a hearty and very sweet feast, he had been shown to his bedroom and had fallen asleep rather quickly. As he stood up, the door to his chamber suddenly opened, and 3 female Apisara attendants walked in, followed by a male drone. The females were wearing toga-like attire, and they bowed to him. The drone was shirtless and wore only a cloth around his waist. He, too, bowed.
"Good morning, sir," the woman said. "The Queen hopes you have slept well. Food is prepared for you in the dining hall, and the Queen asks that you eat your fill."
"Will the Queen not be joining me?" Jake asked.
"Currently," she answered, "our Queen is preparing for another birthing cycle. She will be indisposed for the remainder of the morning. Once she has laid her eggs for the day, she will meet with you. In the meantime, I've been asked to answer your questions and give you a tour of the palace. My name is Emma."
Jake felt a slight pang of disappointment. After learning that the Queen was the only one who could lay eggs, he'd wanted to know more about that, maybe even see the process. But then he shook his head. The more he thought about it, the more the thought disgusted him. It would be no different than wanting to watch a woman go into labor. "Right, of course. Pleasure to meet you. Who are..."
"These are Celia and Tara, and this drone is Rock. We are the ones assigned to you for now," Emma explained.
"I don't need servants," Jake answered.
"Be that as it may, it was our order from the Queen. Therefore, it is our pleasure."
Jake bit his lip, remembering how single-minded the Apisara are. They didn't question anything and simply took every order and directive literally and without question. "All right, lead the way." The meal was, like the previous night, delicious and sweet. Jake began to suspect that perhaps they sweetened their food with honey. He didn't ask, though. He wanted to wait to meet with the Queen and ask her. Emma was an excellent guide, though. She walked Jake all around the palace, explaining each room's purpose and job. She led him to a cleaning area where all Apisara who work in the palace go clean themselves. She also led him to the gardens where workers constructed statues and tended to beautiful fauna that looked opulent and regal in appearance. The smell of honey and nectar were intense everywhere he went, but particularly in the dining hall, and he only further confirmed his suspicions that honey was used in all their dishes. At one point, they passed the throne room doors where he had met the Queen.
"The Queen stays here. This is where she lays eggs and oversees her government,"
Emma explained. "Is she in there now?"
"Yes. She is laying another round of eggs for the nursery. Only nursery castes are allowed in this time."
"How long does the process take?"
"It depends on the number of eggs, but it usually only takes 5 or 6 hours to complete a cycle," Emma answered flatly.
It's not painful, is it?"
"I wouldn't know. Now walk this way."
She walked on, leading Jake away from the throne room. The tour continued beyond the castle walls, showing the architecture. Jake saw worker castes climbing all over the walls, fixing and repairing damage. "Are there always structural problems?" Jake asked.
"Not always," Emma answered. "If there are none to fix, then the worker castes leave the city to repair farms and foraging huts outside the city walls. There is always something for them to fix or build."
Jake watched them toil away and shrugged his shoulders, following Emma onward. The rest of the morning proceeded rather uneventfully until near the end of the tour. As Emma was walking Jake down towards the city square to show him the center of commerce, suddenly she went rigid, her antennae on end. Jake blinked, noticing her reaction, only to see a similar reaction occurring in various other Apisara. It was as if they were all going stiff, their eyes flashing a moment, and they spun in a haunting manner to face something to the south. "What's wrong?" Jake started to ask, when he saw the answer to his question. It was darting fast through the street, knocking over the Apisara in its way. It was taller than any of them by a wide margin, covered in muscles and with a bald head. It had long tusks in its jaws, and a single large round eye on its face. It was charging through the city, bellowing madly. Jake let out a shout of worry, when suddenly he heard loud, angry buzzing, like thousands of angry hornets. He hit the ground in shock as nearly 20 soldiers flew out of nowhere and surrounded the huge Cyclops. "Stand down or die!" the nearest soldier roared. The Cyclops ignored her and threw out his hand, slamming the soldier in the head and sending her crashing into a wall near her. She hit the wall hard and slumped to the ground. Jake couldn't tell if she was dead or out cold, but it was clear this brute was powerful. The other soldiers didn't hesitate. Drawing spears fast, they darted at the Cyclops, engaging in a battle that Jake felt both enthralled by, but also terrified by. The Cyclops was vicious and fast, slamming his boulder-like fist down on the attacking soldiers, crushing two and incapacitating another. But each time a soldier went down, another flew over to fill in, as more and more soldiers were arriving in response to the threat. Within moments, the Cyclops was surrounded by furious and sneering Apisara, and finally he couldn't hold them back any longer as they impaled him from every direction, black spears jutting out from his chest, stomach, and neck as the soldiers finally killed the monster. With the Cyclops dead, the soldiers dispersed and flew back to their posts as if nothing had happened. The corpse of the monster lay there unmoving, bleeding from every spear injury, its eye closed and its mouth slack. What just...
Sorry, but the Queen is ready to see you now, Emmett interrupted, turning to Jake. She has completed her cycle and is requesting your presence.
The throne room looked like he'd remembered. Jake walked down the long carpet leading to the throne where Queen Theodorax was reclining. She looked a bit tired, but still smiled warmly upon seeing him. He bowed formally, but he struggled to mask his concern. The whole trip back to the palace, he'd said little, scared to ask any questions about what had just happened.
Forgive me, she smiled sadly. I woke up realizing I had another batch of eggs to lay, and I was dealing with that matter all morning. It was 5 eggs this morning, so I believe my next round will be around the same number.
Is it so easy to anticipate? Jake asked, hardly caring.
Not always, but an educated guess.
The Queen could see the look on Jake's face and frowned.
The event in the town square. The Cyclops attack. It bothers you? She asked.
Jake nodded his head. He didn't need to ask how she knew about that. He learned that Apisara communicated through pheromones and antennae fidgeting and vibrations. No doubt the word had reached her about the attack. I'd never seen anything like that, Jake admitted. I don't understand what happened. The Queen sat up a bit and sighed.
It happens from time to time, she explained. Our kingdom is situated close to Keltarath, the Forest of Shadows. It's a very dangerous place, and on occasion the abominations of that forest will break into the city and run wild. The Cyclops was one such creature.
How did it break in? And why did all the Apisara go rigid when it showed up? Why didn't they scream or run or something? It was haunting. Like robots, they all just turned and stared at it.
They were scared, don't get me wrong, but they were doing their duty first, the Queen explained. The Cyclops broke through one of the external walls to get into the city. The minute the wall broke, it alerted the soldiers. They sent out a pheromone warning to the city that informed the entire populace of the intruder. All of my children received the signal and began searching for the Cyclops, and when finding it, began releasing the same signal pheromone to inform the soldiers of where it was. Their duty to the city comes before their fear and self-preservation instincts.
Jake shook his head in disbelief. That's so hard to believe. Some of them just stood their ground as it clobbered them. Why don't they care about living? Are they just acting like robots?
I am not familiar with the word robot, the Queen explained. However, I assure you they do care about living. But you must understand, Jake, that we are a very different species. One Apisara alone is not that strong. We require unity and one another to live and to survive. If one Apisara puts themselves over the needs of the colony, then they go against their very nature, the very attribute that allows us to endure. I'm sure my children were terrified of the monster, but they also knew that to run away and hide, not assisting the soldiers, would have been detrimental to the hive.
Jake tried to understand this, but still found himself struggling. What'll happen to the bodies? He asked.
We are a tight-knit community, the Queen explained. Disease is perhaps our greatest enemy of all. We dispose of corpses very carefully. The worker caste will carry the monster's body outside and into the forest of the scavengers. Then they will bury the fallen soldiers and citizens.
You bury your dead?
Do you not?
We do, but I'm sorry. I'm not sure if we shared all of our customs, and after learning as much as I have...
We bury them outside the city in potential farming lands where their bodies will decompose naturally and become fertilizer for us to continue growing crops. For even in death, their bodies continue to benefit everyone.
I'm sorry that I came off as rude, Jake explained.
Not at all, the queen replied. I do not expect you to understand our ways or culture. It is alien to you, and as your ways are to us. It would please me immensely to see your own world, but alas, I cannot go and see it myself. Melfera needs me here.
She stroked one of her long fingers along the arm of her throne and sighed.
The things I'd love to see.
I could tell you of them if you wish.
A wonderful idea, but I fear we would not have time for all the questions I'd like to ask. But for the time being, it would please me for you to remain for another night. Let me make amends for the events of today and let you tour my queendom tomorrow. I will show you far more than what you saw today, and you can see our community working.
Jake smiled at the thought. And you'll show me personally?
Of course.
What if you have to lay eggs again?
She laughed. I doubt I'll lay again tomorrow, but if I do, then I shall permit you to stay with me until I'm done. It's unbecoming of a queen to invite a guest and then leave them alone for so long.
Wait, Jake cried, standing up fast. I couldn't actually stay in the room with you while you're laying eggs, he cried.
Why ever not?
It's rude. It's inappropriate.
To humans, perhaps. But for me, it's just another part of my job. The nursery cask is in the room with me to take the eggs away once laid, and I simply remain on my throne until the process is done, she answered.
Does it hurt, or isn't it uncomfortable?
It's not necessarily pleasant, but it's hardly painful, the queen answered. It's just another part of my job as queen, to bring the next generation to my people.
She finally stood up, smiling as she approached Jake, reaching out a hand.
But this conversation must save for later. I'm quite famished, and I would be delighted to dine with you this evening.
Jake sighed and took her hand. I'm wondering if I'll ever get used to this society. It truly is so starkly different.
That depends highly on how long you remain with us, Ambassador, and I do hope that it is for some time yet. There's much I want to know, and much you have yet to see. But if you are to remain with us for some time, I do have a request.
Oh, what's that, Your Highness? Jake asked.
I would like you to refer to me as Melody, and I might refer to you as Jake. I would wish us friends, not merely professional courtesies.
She beamed, showing a glowing smile.
I've never had a friend beyond my own children, and they're hardly great conversationalists.
Jake smiled back despite himself. He still didn't know if he liked everything about the Apisara or their government or their culture. But that smile from the queen was welcoming and inviting in a manner that he'd not felt in any other country he'd visited. I think we can arrange that, Melody, he said assuredly.
Then I'm pleased to befriend you, Jake. Now let us eat well. I have so many things I'd like to ask you.
And that's the end of that one. Let me take a short break from reading so my throat can rest. All right. Shall we continue? If you guys are ready for another, or would y'all rather stop for tonight? What inspired me to make it? Do you mean the Edenite Chronicles in general? I don't know. Just thought it'd be a creative idea to bring to life the idea of monsters or supernatural beings in a world of humans and vice versa. Because you always see like isekai in anime and stuff like that, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat if we could create an actual world where that could happen, like a total setup of how they would interact? All right. Let's do another. This one is called Working a Beat.
There are three kinds of people who become cops. There are those who want to help their community and make it a better place. There are those who do it to follow in the footsteps of friends or family. And then there are those who want to get high out of a power. In a just world, the first type would make up the majority of the police force, but sadly the third type keeps popping up all too often. The line between good cops and bad cops is as clear as day, so why the hell does no one know how to spot it? Jason's best guess? Necessity. Not a lot of people want to be cops these days. Either they think the job is too dangerous given the political and social climate of the world, or they hate cops in general and don't want anything to do with them in the first place. There are too few cops to deal with all the crime out there, and the ones who want to just do their jobs often find their hands tied behind red tape. You have to wrestle a man to the ground who's resisting arrest? Well, better hope you don't accidentally give him a busted lip, or your name could be on the paper. And if he's a minority, he'll be on the evening news. Of course, Jason was never too worried about that. After all, he was an African-American himself. Born and raised in the Bronx, Jason Walker wanted to be a cop for as long as he could remember. His mom was appalled by the idea, and she tried all his young life to talk him out of it. But Jason never listened. Being a cop was all he wanted to do, and he knew why. And he tried to explain it to her, but she never listened. Most of his friends didn't listen either. Some even thought he was joking, until he graduated the police academy. Now he was a sergeant. He had a common position. He had a responsibility, and good people depending on him. It was something to be proud of. He often enjoyed finding rookies fresh out of the academy to ride with. He'd show them the ropes and help them get more used to the job, but he was also scrutinizing and watching. He had to understand what kind of cop they may turn out to be. Would they disgrace the uniform or bring honor to it? He'd found lots of both kinds. He'd seen plenty of both kinds, plenty who loved the uniform of the duty, and plenty he knew weren't cut out for the job. He was an excellent judge of character, but for the first time in his career, he was stumped. "Morning, Sarge!" Jason blinked and turned to the sound of the trotting behind him. She stood a full head taller than him with her long blonde hair tied back in a bun and an officer's cap on her head. She had on a scarf to keep back the cold from her neck, and she was wearing her winter blue uniform, long-sleeved and gloves on her hands. She saluted cheerfully, and her blue eyes shone with excitement. Her shield on her chest was polished, and her service pistol was strapped to her holster professionally. In every respect, Alicia Hassan looked like a model officer, until you looked below the waist and you realized she was quite different from most cops. From her waist down was a large horse body with 4 hooves and a swishing tail, the same color as her hair. She had on a warm cushion covering over her horse half to defend it from the cold, and it was a nice NYPD blue. Alicia Hassan was a centaur, one of the Edenites. When the dimensional rift in the Bermuda Triangle had been discovered 4 years ago, everyone assumed that war was the only inevitable outcome. A war between humanity and the non-human races of the world known as Eden. These Edenites, as they were collectively called, were more primitive in nature than humanity, but they made up for it in their diversity, skills, and adaptability. When war was avoided, many Edenites began moving to the human world to learn, explore, and work, and inevitably some wanted to join the police force. Since last year, the NYPD had been inducting Edenite officers into the department. But this was Jason's first time with one, and he was going to be her ride-along. "You don't need to salute me right now," Jason advised. Quickly, Allison dropped her hand and blushed.
"Sorry, sir. Just really excited. First day and all."
"Yeah, no," Jason agreed. He then glanced at the patrol cars and smirked to himself as he tried to imagine Alicia squeezing herself into one of them. He'd been smart to just give her a walking beat today. Probably the only kind of beat she could do. But how are they going to get there?
"So, what's first?"
"We have a specific beat we're going to walk, but it's a good distance away, and getting you in a car is, it's going to be a problem," Jason explained. Alicia smiled and lowered herself.
"You can ride on my back if you like,"
she offered. Jason blinked and stepped back a pace. She hadn't lost her smile.
"It's fine. I don't mind."
"Really?" he asked. "I figure you might take offense."
"Oh, some might, but I really don't," she shrugged. "We do what we have to so we can get the job done."
Jason stared at her for a long moment. This behavior was a bit unprofessional, but he also couldn't help but concede the point. Without taking her offer, she'd never get to their destination. "All right, if you're sure." Jason was relieved to finally be on his own 2 feet again after riding all the way to Central Park. It wasn't that Alicia was difficult to ride, not at all. She was very careful and steady in her pace. It was the look she got and the uncomfortable sensation that Jason had riding with her. He felt it was inappropriate, mounting her like this. She clearly didn't mind and even seemed excited to start her work. When people saw her, some waved, and there were occasional Edenites that walked by who waved to her. One even seemed to know her, and she waved back at him. But now that he was on his feet again, he adjusted his hat and looked to the very eager young centaur. All right, so when walking, there are lots of things you need to keep in mind, Jason explained, going through his normal explanation.
What kind of things?
It's never a good idea for police to just hide in their cars. Pedestrians like to feel like they're safe, so if we're walking around in plain view, it often helps to sell that. Sometimes they'll even come up to you and ask for help or inform you of some crime they saw. You listen to them, take statements, and help where you can. In those cases, of course.
Right,
Alicia beamed. Think it's easy?
No, sir,
she quickly corrected herself. Don't lie, kid, he answered. One thing you need to remember on this job is you need to be sure of yourself. If you make a choice, then commit to it.
What if it's the wrong choice? Alicia asked.
It don't matter. If you show uncertainty to civilians, then they'll take it as weakness. They'll see what else they can make you cave on. Trust your instincts and follow your training. If you ever don't know the right thing to do, ask your partner or radio a superior. But when you act on something, you better damn stick to it.
Got it, Sarge.
Alicia smiled as they started walking. As they walked, a few folks looked pointed and stared at her. And Jason didn't like it. They were making her out to be some kind of freak show or attraction, not a police officer. It was disgraceful. But Alicia didn't seem to mind. Got a question for you, rookie, he asked.
Sir?
Why did you move from Eden to be a cop, he asked. Alicia blinked at him and slowed her pace.
Why'd I do it?
It just seems an odd choice. Leave home and be a police officer in a city that still sees you as a monster? Jason explained. Alicia thought about it for a moment, crossing her arms over her breast as she walked. Jason had to take long strides to keep up with her.
Well, honestly, it's a complicated explanation, she replied.
We got time, Jason shrugged. Alicia smiled and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear.
Well, I'm from the province of Ellendale, in the kingdom of Rohellum, she explained.
She noticed Jason's bewildered expression.
Sorry, Rohellum is one of the 7 kingdoms of Eden.
I honestly don't know all that much about Eden, Jason explained.
Well, Rohellum is a diverse kingdom with many races that call it home, but the kingdom is predominantly dominated by beastmen, more like animal-like races.
Like centaurs? Jason asked.
Alicia nodded. Yes, and my clan live in the province of Ellendale, which is controlled by Rohellum, she added.
Sounds nice. Jason tried to be polite without conceding just how lost he was. How did any of this answer his question?
Well, one of the big problems we have in Ellendale is how far away we are from the capital of Rohellum. We sometimes get attacked or raided by bandit groups or elements of neighboring lands, she explained. The Rohellum soldiers can't always come to help, so we took up arms and formed the Ellendale militia, citizens who were training to fight back if bandits showed up.
Jason listened and tried to mentally picture that. Were you a member?
I started training under my dad, she explained. But Dad never really wanted me to join the militia. He said it was too dangerous. He wanted me to find a future away from Ellendale and somewhere safer.
And he recommended the human world? Jason asked.
Well, actually, no. He's furious that I came here. Absolutely livid, she giggled.
Jason snorted, trying to hold back laughter. You ain't making any sense, he chortled.
Alicia giggled. Well, see, it's like this. I didn't want... Police!
Jason and Alicia were pulled away from the conversation by a woman running towards them, eyes wild and her hair messed up. She was wearing sweatpants and a jogging shirt with a fanny pack around her waist that bobbed lightly as she ran.
Police, help!
Jason broke into a run towards her with Alicia behind him. What is it? What's wrong? He demanded. She pointed away from her down the path she'd been running. She was out of breath, barely able to form words. My purse was taken, she cried. He ran that way. She kept pointing in the direction of the pathway. Jason looked up the path and nodded.
We'll get him, Alicia said firmly. Come on, Sarge.
Rookie, Jason snarled at her dangerously. Alicia looked surprised.
Sarge, we got this, she urged.
He ignored her and turned to the woman. What's he look like?
It happened so fast, you remember. He had on a red shirt, blue jeans, jacket on.
White man, black man, Hispanic? Jason urged. The woman thought for a moment, then he nodded.
He looked black. He was a bit taller than you.
Facial hair? Jason pushed.
Sarge, he's gonna get away, Alicia pushed.
Shut it, rookie, Jason snapped back.
I'm sorry. I don't remember anything. Please, I can't remember.
The woman was in hysterics, clutching her chest as Jason helped her to a bench, and then he grabbed his radio. This is Sergeant Williams. We have a purse snatching report in the area. Suspect is tall, African-American male wearing red shirt, blue jeans. Suspect was last seen running southbound, pursuing on foot. Any units in the area, please acknowledge. Copy that, Sarge. Got a car heading that way. We'll box him in. Acknowledge, he replied. Finally turned to the woman again and smiled reassuringly. It's going to be all right, ma'am. Rookie, with me. He turned and started running down the path with Alicia right next to him, running fast. She looked peeved, but he didn't speak until they were out of the woman's line of sight. Don't you ever do that again, rookie.
Do what, Sarge?
Make promises like that, he growled back. One of the first rules dealing with citizens and victims, don't ever make promises.
Well, why not? She was scared. She needed hope.
And what will you tell her when you don't get back her purse? Jason snarled. What happens when you can't keep your promise?
Alicia didn't answer, staring ahead, unable to look into his eyes. "You're too green for this, Alicia. I don't much care what your dad taught you about being in the militia, but police are not militia. And if you thought this was some kind of combat zone where you'd be fighting the good fight and waging war against the criminal scum of the world, then you better head on back to Eden. In this city, nothing is that poetic or that simple." Jason slowed his run, and Alicia pulled ahead before realizing he'd slowed down.
"Why are you stopping?"
"Because you're going the wrong way," Jason explained.
But the victim pointed this way,"
Alicia said, confused. Jason shook his head. "First rule of walking a beat, kid, never trust everything you hear. Trust your instincts."
"I don't understand, Sarge."
"Did you notice how that woman was dressed?" he asked.
"Sweatpants, sweater, running shoes. She was probably a runner."
"Do you normally go running with a purse?" he asked.
Alicia frowned a moment and then her eyes widened. She had a fanny pack. "She never had a purse in the first place," Alicia cried.
"Very good." Jason turned back to the way they had come. "Now ask yourself, why would a woman lie about a purse being stolen?"
Alicia thought hard and tried to put the pieces together. "Because she wanted to trick us."
"Yes, she wanted the cops to go the other way. Now why would she want that? Why would you want the police out of the way?" Jason asked.
"So she could commit a crime," Alicia cried.
Jason nodded. "Very good.
"Then why are we just standing here? We gotta stop her. Why do you even let us run this way?"
Will she? And here I thought centaurs were fast." The woman's name was Belinda Harding, and she was now jogging her way to the exit of the park, feeling quite pleased with herself. It was always the same. Bleeding heart coppers are easy to fool if you shed some crocodile tears and point them away from you. Then, by the time they get back to give you the bad news, you're already jogging away with the goods in your pack. It had been a little different this time, what with that horsewoman there, but it was fine now. She was home free. The sound of galloping hooves, though, pounding behind her, and Belinda turned around to see the centaur girl bounding towards her. Belinda had only a moment to look terrified before she began sprinting. She jumped a fence and tore across the green lawn to escape. The centaur was right behind her, her legs pounding to get away, but it was no use, as the police horsewoman was now on top of her with an abnormally long pole in her hands, which she swiftly used to strike out and knock out Belinda's feet. She screamed and rolled to the ground as the policewoman trotted past her and turned to gallop back, holding the pole over her as if to spear her to the ground with it.
"Don't move," she shouted. "Why are you chasing me?" she cried. "What the hell did I do?"
"Well," a new voice panted, finally catching up, "I think you can help explain that." Jason had caught up, his uniform dirty and his hat off as he panted heavily, trying to catch his breath. "Wish you waited for me to get on your back before taking off, Officer Hassan."
"Sorry, Sarge," she answered, not moving her pole. "What the hell is wrong with you two?"
"Well, see, we started to look for a purse snatcher, but, I forgot. We had to take your name so we would know who to call if we didn't find it. The problem is, though, you was already gone. It kind of makes me wonder how attached you were to that purse." He then knelt down and pointed to her fanny pack. "Besides, wouldn't your stuff be in this?"
"You leave that alone," she cried.
"Sorry, but we have a rule. We have to rule out a few things. Purses, carry all kinds of items, and we just need to see what you're already carrying so we know what we won't find in your purse." He then unzipped the pack and smiled as he saw bags of white powder hidden within. "I'm guessing we can rule out makeup." Jason sat on a bench at the park as two officers walked Belinda Harding to their car for processing. He had a bottle of water in his hands and he was sucking from, thirst gripping him fiercely. Alicia stood beside him, looking both pleased but a little embarrassed. "That was a good takedown. Very clean," Jason told her.
"Thank you, but I'm sorry about how I acted earlier."
"You're still inexperienced, rookie," he said, "but don't feel too bad. She's probably done this before, misleading cops so they won't notice her running out with drugs in her pocket."
"Why even risk it? If she just jogged by, we wouldn't have noticed," Alicia sighed.
"Sometimes to overcompensate, criminals overplay their hand. They're so convinced that they're acting suspicious that they try to compensate and convince you to look the other way. Some cops are the same. They're so desperate to play hero, they make promises they have no way of keeping." "Sound familiar?" Jason asked.
"I'm sorry, sir."
"Why did your dad not want you to come here? I want to hear the rest of that story." Alicia shrugged and rubbed her shoulders.
"Dad told me the human world is dangerous, filled with dishonorable and wicked people who would gladly stab me in the back for being different. But the truth is, I want to help people. That's all I want to do. If I can't do it in Eden, I want..." She paused and looked downtrodden. Jason stared at her a moment and sighed, rubbing his hands together as he sat down his half-empty water bottle.
No, I never knew my dad, Jason explained. He was a police officer too, you know.
He was?
Won an award for selflessness and valor in the line of duty. Saved a whole school bus of kids one time too. He was a real hero.
He was?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you did know him.
Well, my mom told me a lot about him, but, you know, he died when I was only 2, Jason explained. Shot in the back by a perp who he didn't see coming. Alicia's smile faded past.
I'm so sorry.
Mom didn't want me following in his footsteps, but it's all I ever wanted to do. The two sat quietly, not speaking for a moment, as the sounds of the city and the park drifted around them softly. Rookie, there are 3 kinds of people who become cops. The kind who genuinely want to help people and do the right thing. The kind who do it because their friends and family do it. And the kind who just want the high of power and authority. I knew I was never the latter, but sometimes I was afraid that I wasn't the first one either. I kept asking myself if I became a cop because I wanted to do the right thing, because I wanted to make life better for other people, or because I'm living in my dad's shadow. That's what Mom thought. She thought I was only doing this for my dad, not for me. But she doesn't get it. He glanced up at her. There are a lot of people in the city who think my skin color means I'm a victim. They look at me and see a black man, and there are some who think it means I'm entitled because I'm a black man in a society of white people. But being a cop to some of them is a complete paradox. Why would a black man do that? Why would any young black boy from a low-income, single-parent household want to become a cop if it wasn't for his dead hero dad? You may not be used to that where you come from, and I don't care about that stuff. I never did. And I never will. All I care about is who I want to be for the rest of my life. I want to be a cop. And not just for my dad, but for me. You did the same thing when you came here and signed on to be a cop. I can tell you the kind of cop who wants to make this world a better place. Idealistic and headstrong. You should be wearing a suit of armor instead of a shield. Alicia blushed and giggled at that.
You think so?
You got a strong heart, rookie. But if you really want to make this city safe, you have a lot to learn, he pointed out.
Then let's keep going. We still have more time in our tour today.
Not so fast, rookie. You just call it a drug runner. You got to do the paperwork, he snickered. Let's head back to the precinct and get all that out of the way. Then we can see about turning you into a superhero.
And that was Working a Beat. That one was a fun one for me to write, honestly. Next up, a fateful interview. Sarah walked into the Starbucks, eyes on her phone like most of other college students her age. She stroked long black hair out of her eyes and adjusted her glasses as she stared at her notes on the phone screen. The air was chilly and overcast outside, promising rain sometime today, so she bundled herself up a bit in her hoodie. Sarah was in her graduate program and wrapped up in notes, thoughts, and questionable accounts, all for the sake of her big thesis paper. The subject? Edenites. Everyone on Earth knew about them, of course, almost a decade ago. A massive rift in reality appeared in the Bermuda Triangle, opening up a gateway to a world without humans, but filled with monsters, demi-humans, and magic. This land, called Eden, was populated and tensions were high the moment Earth and Eden met. Many believed war was inevitable. However, thanks to the diplomatic efforts of both the United Nations, the NATO alliance, and the Confederacy of the Nine Kingdoms, at last peace was established, and a mutual agreed exchange and exposure program was instituted. Humans were allowed to travel to and from Eden to see and discover it, while Edenites were allowed to travel to Earth, or Terra as they call it, and better understand humanity and Earth, for they lacked human technology. Now, for about 4 years, humans and Edenites, as they had come to be called, were learning to coexist, though it was a very shaky relationship. Sarah's goal was to write a full thesis on the importance of Eden and the governments therein, but she lacked solid information. She never had a chance to visit. Of course, it was too expensive to get a visa, and it took forever just to cut through all the legislative red tape, because Edenites were rare in her city still, and any she did meet knew little about the topics of government or legislation or history of their world. She was struggling to find any kind of intel or direction. It was starting to get hopeless.
No, sir, I'm afraid we don't accept those.
Sarah glanced up from her phone to full of notes to see a man standing at the counter, holding up the line.
He looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s in age. He was wearing a long blue tailcoat and dress pants. He had on a button-down dress shirt and tie was visible under the coat. He looked like a lawyer or businessman of some kind if he'd stepped out of an old movie or something. He had long white hair tied back and a long tail that hung to his back. He had blue eyes like the sea and a very fair but stern face that was mixed with confusion and fear at present. He was sorting through a bag in his hand desperately. Yes, forgive me, I'm not used to Terran currency, He was fumbling over himself. Several people behind him were groaning and tapping their feet, and Sarah suddenly felt a lurch in her gut when he'd said, Terran currency. She took another look at the man and saw a pair of pointed ears behind his white hair, and she nearly screamed. An elf. This man was an elf. An Edenite. Sir, she cried. The man glanced at her and gave an apologetic nod. Yes, I'm quite sorry. I do not mean to make you wait. I will be... Are you from Eden? Sarah practically blurted. The man looked surprised and nodded. Why, yes, I am, he answered. Again, I must ask you to be patient with me. Could we talk, please? She blurted again, her heart beating a mile a minute. The man looked absolutely dumbfounded. Young lady, I don't know if now is the best. I'll help you with this, she cried. How much does he owe for the drink? She asked. $5.30, she answered. Sarah reached into her pocket, grabbed $6 and slammed it on the counter. Keep the change. How on earth did... The elf started to say, but then was stopped as Sarah pulled him out of the line with his drink. She was grinning from ear to ear. Sorry, but I really need your help. So, that's what this is about, the elf gentleman asked, sipping his coffee with a smirk on his face. His voice was more relaxed now and refined, a deep tone that had a mixture of authority but also wisdom. He brushed a strand of silvery hair back behind his pointed ear and nodded. You only wish to know about governmental matters in Eden for your education. I can't go to Eden myself, Sarah sighed, grumbling and strumming her fingers. I don't have the money or time, and I can't just talk to any random Edenite about this kind of thing. It's not like they all know, but most of the Edenites I meet are my age or younger, and you seem older than all of them. Sorry, no offense. His laugh was soft and smooth like water. I take no offense. For elves, age is often a topic of interest for other races. Our lifespans are far longer than any other race. For instance, I'm 749 years old. Really? Sarah cried. But you look 40 or so by human standards. A Terran's lifespan is around 90 to 100 years, correct? An elf's lifespan is typically around 1,000 to 1,200. I'm into my middle ages at this point, he smiled. But onto your topic of interest. I would be delighted to discuss Eden with you. I'm pleased to confess that I know a great deal about Eden, having been living there for the last 7 centuries. Wow, really? Sarah asked. Yes, you did help me with that currency issue earlier. The least I can do is this, he smiled. Besides, my meeting isn't for a few hours. I'd be honored to talk with you in the meantime. Sarah dug through her backpack until she found a small black box-shaped object and laid it on the counter. The elf eyed it and smirked. What is this? It's a tape recorder. I'd like to record our interview, Sarah offered. You mean to say this object can record our discussion without the need of a scribe? But where's the paper for it to do this? It doesn't use paper, Sarah laughed. It simply records our voice. Here, I'll show you. Sarah clicked the red button on top of it. My name is Sarah Ginsburg, and what is your name, sir? Forgive me, it just occurred to me. I've not introduced myself. You may call me Phaedrus, if it helps you. Sarah smiled and stopped the recorder. She rewound it swiftly and then played it back. As Phaedrus listened, he gasped in amazement. Fascinating. A Terran technology is a thing of wonder. Imagine if we had this back home. I shudder to think. Well, do you think we can do it this way? Of course, I don't mind at all, he smiled. What do you wish to know? Everything, Sarah cried, turning on the recorder. At this, Phaedrus chuckled again and nodded. Well, there are 7 nations in Eden. The Elvish Empire of Lethra, the Dwarfish Kingdom of Erodoth, the Rohalam Federation of Provinces, the Queendom of Melphera, the Sea Nation of Nila, the Orcish Khanate of Kravash, and finally, the Wild States of Gore. I can't speak to the exact structure of all 7 of these nations, but I can give you the basics if you wish. Can we start with Rohalam? Sarah asked. Rohalam is a large nation made up of various small provinces that are made of various tribes, races, and peoples. They are not a monarchy like the other nations, but function as a congressional body of 9 elected representatives. They are largely an independent people who live off the land and value hard work over publicity and status. Their people are hardy and tough, largely from the way they live their lives as craftsmen, builders, and farmers. You said the other nations are monarchies, Sarah asked. Well, all except Rohalam and the Gore. Gore is not truly a nation per se. It's a tribal land made up of different clans, tribes, and ancient treaties of barbaric groups. They are hardly civilized there, and any attempts to civilize them have met with poor outcomes.
What kind of races live there?
Several. But one thing you should know about Eden is that, much like you humans, where an Edenite lives will impact their behavior. For example, an elf from Lethra will behave and think differently than an elf raised in Gore. We call Gorish elves dark elves because they are, well, less civilized.
And you refer to yourselves as high elves?
No, Phaedrus answered. To be called a high elf would imply we are superior, and this is a sentiment I'm desperate to see removed from my people. We elves are no better than any other race in Eden or Terra. We have much to learn from others, and to hold ourselves superior because of our physical characteristics is the epitome of stupidity.
You sound very serious about this, Sarah pointed out.
I'm deathly serious. Our people will not survive into the future if we do not learn to adapt, and perhaps it would be easier to explain in another way. Would you like to walk with me?
It was a light drizzle outside as she and the gentleman Phaedrus walked. He didn't seem to mind it. As the gentle rain tapped lightly on their heads, he smiled politely, as Sarah pulled out a small umbrella, but when she offered one to him, he shook his head. I prefer to feel the rain. In Eden, we do not have umbrellas. We let nature do as it may. A drizzle like this can feel quite refreshing.
If you insist.
It is fascinating how different our worlds are. Terra is a world of technology, innovation, and progress. You're always moving a step forward in your thinking, and life is easier for you than it would ever be for us in Eden. Your level of comprehension of the world and its ways is unquestionable. It's a wonder. However, I feel there does come a price for this. Despite humanity's ability to invent and grow, you are an ignorant people. Humanity is, in many respects, blind to the things that we of Eden are familiar with. The subtle appreciation of rain, for instance. How curious it is that in the presence of rain, humanity thought, how do I prevent it from touching me? While we instead appreciated the comfort of its touch.
I suppose that's just a comfort thing.
Exactly. Comfort. Mankind prioritizes comfort. And don't misunderstand, comfort is not bad. We in Eden also aspire to comfort and recreation, but we do not sacrifice our nature and our ties to the world around us to seek it. Sarah blinked a moment and then folded and put away her umbrella. As wet raindrops plopped on her head, she winced momentarily and then tried to let go of the sensation.
It's different, Sarah confessed.
Oh, you need not change yourself or your habits for me. Please do not take my rambling to heart. I'm merely observing the reality that our worlds are fundamentally different in outlook, and it is this outlook that I fear is causing more harm to my people. He glanced up at the sky with a sorrowful expression, his blue eyes glazing somewhat, as though he were looking beyond the heavens to somewhere else. When our worlds first met, it caused a panic amongst the people for all of Eden. There were many who wished for war, not to conquer terror, but to defend ourselves from it. Our fear was that the ignorance of humans, the differences in our outlooks and beliefs, would end up destroying us.
And do you think that's true? Sarah asked.
I do, Phaedrus answered. Oh, I certainly do. A cursory look at human history is painfully clear that humanity will fight, kill, and destroy in the name of personal progress or to acquire land, resources, or profit. That said, we are not so different in this regard. After living over 7 centuries, I've witnessed my fair share of wars and conflicts in Eden, and the same sentiments are not unknown to us. The difference between Edenites and humans is this. When it comes to war, humans have mastered this art in a way we have not. Humanity is one race, and when all of your world is at stake, you will unite to defend it. We Edenites are various races with our own cultures, ideals, and creeds. We would unite, but not immediately, and by the time we did, we would still struggle to coordinate. Were a full-scale war to happen, I have no doubt Eden would be in true trouble. Even were we to emerge the victors, the cost would not have been worth the gain. Sarah frowned and looked away sadly, the rain feeling heavier on her head.
I mean, when you put it that way.
Phaedrus paused and looked at her again, his eyes returning to their deep blue color. My apologies, Miss Sarah. I did not mean to dampen your disposition. Please understand, I do not think less of humanity. Quite the contrary, He stopped and blinked, glancing down as he stopped moving. Sarah stopped and looked at him, and his eyes were filled with a kind of reflective sorrow. In truth, I envy humanity. You are capable of so much. You lack many of the physical strengths of Edenites, but you still persevere and endure and conquer all the same. Were my people so resilient, I came to this world to learn and to discover, and yet the more I do, the more I recognize that humans possess things I lack, things I require.
I don't understand, Sarah answered,
her recorder all but forgotten. Phaedrus smiled sadly at her. I imagine you don't. And it is better you don't comprehend my problem, Phaedrus answered. Phaedrus suddenly stopped speaking and turned his head behind them. Sarah turned as well to see 2 electric mopeds riding up the road behind them. Phaedrus' eyes narrowed curiously. Are they friends of yours? He asked.
I don't know anyone who drives a...
Look out! Phaedrus suddenly grabbed Sarah hard and yanked her to the side as the moped on the left swerved violently and nearly ran her down. But in the process of her being pulled down, the moped on the right drove up right alongside her, and arms shot out, grabbing the purse hanging from her shoulder. The driver let out a laugh and yanked hard, pulling it from her arm before rejoining the first moped again. Later! The driver shouted.
Hey!
Sarah cried, tearing after them. Phaedrus ran after her, and the 2 chased the mopeds down an alley they'd turned into. By good fortune, the alley ended in a dead end. The drivers cursed loudly and took off their helmets, showing both drivers were young men. One had blonde hair and the other black, but both had identical green eyes and pointed ears. Like elves. The first set the purse aside and growled. I knew this was a wrong turn, you idiot! Shut up! It's not like we can't get out of this. Just a human girl and an old man, the other snapped. Sarah, who had been running hard to catch up to the mopeds, was now breathing heavily, clutching her knees. She hadn't thought past this moment. Yes, she had them cornered, but what could she do? Her pepper spray was in her purse, and she didn't have it now. Plus, there was Phaedrus, who was just now stepped up to join her. Are you quite all right? Phaedrus asked her. Run and call the police, she cried. I'm afraid that won't do, Phaedrus responded. These 2 thieves are both elves, and if I'm correct by their features, they are members of the Ellendale family. Both of the thieves suddenly blinked, their eyes widened. The hell? How'd you... He's trying to psych us out, man, the other snapped. My word, how disappointed your family must be, Phaedrus snarled, taking a few dangerous steps forward. Sarah was stunned by his demeanor and words. She didn't even attempt to ask him what he was talking about. Your names, Lothric and Horatio, yes? Your uncle would be ashamed to see you like this. Haven't you done enough harm to your family's reputation as it is? I'm sure you'll be punished severely by him for this atrocity. That is, after I've punished you, of course. Wait, how do you know our uncle? Lothric shouted. This old bastard's asking for it, Horatio snapped, pulling out a switchblade from his pocket. Let's just cut his neck and be done with it. Dale just held out his hand, and to Sarah's amazement, he brushed the attack aside. From seemingly nowhere, a long black walking cane materialized in his hand as he struck Horatio in the back of the head, and then tripped Lothric in the back sweep. Both hit the ground hard before turning to stare at Phaedrus. I will allow you one chance to repent, Phaedrus snarled, his eyes flashing. You will fall on your knees and beg for amnesty. You cocky ass, Lothric shouted. They both jumped up to attack. Phaedrus' eyes flashed like blue fire, and he slammed his staff on the ground with a loud crack. Instantly, the raindrops falling froze in midair, unmoving, floating as if suspended by threads. It was in this instant that Lothric and Horatio seemed to realize the grave mistake they'd made. I said, on your knees! Phaedrus struck the ground, and the rain suddenly moved again, flowing into one entity like small droplets flowing into a river. The new floating river of water swirled around Phaedrus once before rushing at the 2 young elves, smashing into them like a car wreck. Both elves were thrown off their feet by the torrent and crashing into the asphalt, coughing and screaming in shock. Sarah herself dropped to her knees in terror at the sudden magical power she'd witnessed. When Phaedrus relaxed, the rainwater began to fall again as it normally did, but his eyes lost none of their intensity. Both Lothric and Horatio were sputtering and looking mortified as both scrambled to their hands and knees. Emperor Phaedrus! Lothric cried. Forgive us for not recognizing you. Emperor? Sarah squeaked as she beheld the High Emperor of the Elvish Empire.
Oh, man.
Be silent, Phaedrus snapped at Lothric. You disgrace your name and your race, and me with your behavior. You and your brother will be returned to Lethra immediately, where you will face punishment under the full letter of our law. If you thought you could evade the shame you'd receive from your uncle in Terra, you are sadly mistaken. His eyes then turned to Sarah. Miss Sarah, I advise you return home for today, while I contend with these hoodlums. Let us reconvene tomorrow morning at the coffee shop again. I would like to finish our interview then. Sarah was so mortified she didn't reply, merely stared as Emperor Phaedrus grabbed both young men and dragged them away by the scruff of their necks with a show of strength like she never would have expected.
I am so screwed, Sarah whimpered.
When the next morning came, Sarah told herself not to go to the coffee shop. There was no point.
Phaedrus, no, High Emperor Phaedrus, had more important things to do than talk to some dumb college-age girl for silly interviews. How could she have been so stupid? She knew the name of the Emperor of Lethra was Phaedrus, but she hadn't even thought about it when he'd said it. She'd just been so caught up in meeting a knowledgeable Edenite willing to talk to her, she'd just forgotten. She wouldn't go. She just had to move on. She didn't want to cause him any more trouble. So why did she still find herself in the coffee shop now, waiting for him to come? I shouldn't be here. I should go home, and I should just forget I ever met him. I'll use what I got for the recording, and...
Ah, Miss Sarah!
Sarah squeaked as she looked up. Phaedrus was there, wearing his same tailcoat and holding his cane in hand. He had a bright smile on his face as he approached. He wasn't alone, though. Flanking him on either side was a male and female elf. Both were wearing black suits and ties. The male was taller than Phaedrus, with black hair tied back down to his back. The woman had silvery hair that was combed to one side. Both were clearly guards of some kind. They were there to guard their emperor, unlike yesterday.
Your Majesty,
she squealed, bowing her head. Oh, please, don't do that. Phaedrus flushed with an embarrassed smile. I grow so weary of that formality. Half the reason I ducked to my security yesterday was to avoid such problems.
Had you been with us, sire, you wouldn't have run into those issues yesterday, the woman explained coldly.
Ah, but it was quite the adventure, Phaedrus pointed out. And I made a delightful acquaintance in Miss Sarah here.
Please, sire, I can't. I shouldn't take up your time with this interview. It's not right. Let's just forget all about it, Sarah whimpered shamefully.
Phaedrus frowned at this and his eyes seemed saddened. Really? That is unfortunate. I was genuinely looking forward to talking more with you, but I do suppose I have a lot to take care of here while I'm in Terra, he sighed. But I was under the impression you still needed to write your paper. How will you finish without an interview?
I'll figure something out, Sarah answered, her discomfort very apparent.
Phaedrus tapped his chin and then he smiled. Ah, I have a solution, he said proudly. I'll be returning to Lethra in 4 days after my business here is concluded. It would be my honor to invite you with me as my honored guest. Sarah nearly fell out of her seat.
What?
You'd get to see Eden firsthand, and when I could introduce you to my wife. She knows just as much about royal affairs and culture as I do, and would be far more available to you to speak to. And perhaps, if time permits, I can show you Lethra itself.
I can't, Sarah squeaked. I don't have a visa.
That's easily arranged. Phaedrus nodded to the gentleman behind him, and the elf guard nodded, pulling out a flip cell phone to make a call.
But I have classes,
Sarah said lamely as the excuse died on her lips. She knew that was no excuse, and her desire to go was outweighing it as she said it. Phaedrus chuckled. Please, is that really what's holding you back? Sarah, my dream is for cooperation between Terra and Eden. I'm very much in the minority among the Edenite monarchs on this point. They might see that we can and must understand one another. We are not alike. We are worlds different. But humans have proven that, even given their differences, they can still cooperate and grow exponentially. How far could we climb if we gave ourselves the chance to do the same?
But sir, I'm no one.
You approached me with the desire to know more, Phaedrus argued. To me, you are a valued friend. I wish to know more about you as well, and we shall have more time to do this back home. Will you accept? Phaedrus asked. Sarah didn't need to answer. She was already beaming from ear to ear and planning everything she'd have to ask when she made it to Lethra. And that was a fateful interview. All right. I think we have time for one more. One more. This is the last one I have written. I wrote it June 29th, 2024. Diplomacy of Warriors. I yawned, feeling the weight of the day bearing down on my shoulders. I wanted nothing more than to go inside, kick off my shoes, and fall asleep. I didn't even need to get out of my suit. I'd probably just have to put it back on in the morning again. I felt like I was always working these days, especially with the new Edenite bills and laws being passed. I was an aide to one of the ambassadors who was working on these bills, and I've been run ragged for the last several days trying to keep up with every new development or idea that went through that old fool's mind. It made me sick of Eden at this point, and I'd only been there once. Eden.
The name given to that other world beyond ours. 9 years ago, a rift was discovered in the Bermuda Triangle that led to an alternative reality where there were no humans and technology was still trapped in the Dark Ages. The creatures there were all races and species that once existed only in fantasy novels and Dungeons and Dragons games. War seemed likely, but fortunately diplomacy resulted instead. Now there were efforts for mutual cooperation and travel between the two worlds, and as an aide to an ambassador to America, there were several Edenites trying to discuss possible trade deals, travel plans, and law adjustments, and of course, I had to deal with all of it. I finally parked my car at my house and got out to walk to the door. As I approached the door, I looked to see I wasn't alone there. There were two very tall figures at the front door, both wearing hoods over their heads, but other than that, their attire was quite different. The taller of the two was huge, broad, with massive limbs like tree trunks. He wore clothes that seemed to be made from animal furs and hides, and I could smell him from the end of the driveway. The one next to him was more slim, but no less broad on the shoulders. This one wore a leather jacket and jeans, as if she were trying to pass as human, but I had no doubt neither were. As they turned to see me, I could see I was correct. Both had green skin and tusks jutting from their lower lips. The bigger one had a black beard and large tusks with a chip in the left one. He had a scar over one eye, and he looked rather old, with gray hairs in his beard. The other was feminine, with shorter tusks and long black hair like the man's. Husband and wife, perhaps? I couldn't be sure. But they were definitely orcs. I had had the chance to meet any before. The girl stepped forward as I approached.
"Excuse," she said in a very thick and broken accent. "Forgive this one, but is your Terran Daniel Blackstone?"
I stiffened a bit. Terran was the term Edenites used for humans, since they referred to our world as Terra. Her style of speech was poor, but it was clear she was at least able to speak some English. I wasn't aware orcs had even a passing knowledge of our language. Yes, I am. How can I help you?"
"Ah, excuse." She bowed and turned to the tall male orc to speak to him. "Tirakum Kravash, Terrakrim Blackstone."
The large Reuben orc snorted and brought his fist up to touch his chest. "Tall," he said in a deep and gruff voice.
"Tall?" I asked. "Excuse," the girl repeated. "This High Kravash Garshul Drakeslayer, High Khan of the Kravash Khanate."
This caused me to jump in surprise, the fatigue I felt gone altogether. The Kravash Khanate was the largest orc-controlled government in Eden. They were a warrior nation of some of the mightiest fighters in all of Eden and had outright refused any and all contact with humanity, feeling that the word Kravash is their word for chieftain or Khan. To carry the name Kravash meant you were a boss, a leader of orcs, and to be very respected. But to be the High Kravash, the greatest of them all? Oh my God.
"And I am Ashraka Throat Ripper, but you call Ashraka if more nicer."
I stared at this female orc and gulped. "With a name like that, I suppose there's a story to it."
She smiled. "Title given for ripping throats of Grod."
"Of course," I gulped and absentmindedly rubbed my throat. "So, Ashraka, how can I help you in Garshul?" At the sound of his name, Garshul stiffened a bit and Ashraka ran forward.
"Please excuse, but refer as Kravash Garshul, its rightful title. Forget is bad insult."
I felt myself grow white, and I swiftly corrected myself. "Forgive me. How can I help Kravash Garshul?" Garshul seemed to calm down, and he spoke once more to Ashraka in his tongue. Why didn't he speak English like her? Ashraka waited for him to finish before speaking.
"Kravash Garshul say, it would please orc clans greatly if Terra open talk to orcs now. We come here because I seen you before in meet place for Eden monarchs."
I tried to think back to what she was talking about. It was true I'd been to Eden on a monarch meeting 3 years ago when initial diplomacy began, but the orcs had been there, but Orc Kravash had been adamant that he wanted nothing to do with humans and walked out with his retinue. But now that I thought of it, that orc at that meeting looked different. Was Garshul not the same orc? "I remember the meeting, but the orcs would refuse any and all diplomatic talks," I answered. Ashraka's face fell a bit, and she relayed my words to Garshul. He bowed his head and spoke in an undertone.
"Kravash Garshul say, yes, old Kravash Ulhak was fool. He deny talks. He dead now. I knew Kravash and wanting make talk."
"The old High Kravash is dead?" I gasped. "When did this happen?"
1 moon ago, Ashraka explained. Kravash Garshul challenge Ulhak for Kravash challenge and for High Kravash seat. Kravash Garshul win and kill Ulhak in duel. Now High Kravash. Him word law.
She looked at her master proudly, and he gave a smile and spoke again. Ashraka listened and then spoke.
"Kravash Garshul say, are you one who open talk with orcs?"
I blinked, remembering why they were here. Oh, well, you need to set up an appointment with Ambassador Dixon, and we could have a discussion about...
Excuse, Ashraka spoke up. What is appointment?
Appointment. A time where he is able to meet with you, I answered, baffled by our limited knowledge.
So, Ambassador no talk yet. When can talk?
I pulled out my phone and paged through the calendar I had set up to find the next available appointment day. He has an opening in 8 days, so you'll have to come back on Friday of next week. Ashraka looked confused, and I showed her the calendar pointing to our day. Each of these boxes is a day, see? I showed her until finally she grasped the meaning of the calendar.
Ah, so it is long time then. Excuse.
She turned to Garshel and spoke to him. He spoke back. She spoke. They had this conversation for about 5 minutes before finally she turned back to me.
Excuse. Kravash Garshel say. Did not know would take long time. Cannot stay away from clan too long. Must return. For now, Ashraka Throatripper stay here and speak for orcs.
What? You?
Yes. Please excuse. She bowed her head sadly. Kravash Garshul is most important orc. He no stay away long time. He return when can, but if busy, I speak for him.
I mean, that's nice, but any decision about trade and travel has to be approved by a member of the governmental body, the people we work with. She looked confused, and I groaned. What I mean is, we can only talk to members of your country's leadership, like your chiefs, or kings, or khans.
Oh, this fine, she smiled. Am Datukir, daughter of Kravash Garshul, so am in leader family.
Wait, you're his daughter?
I guess. Most orcs no learn English speak, but I learning best can. Need speak for Kravash Garshul when meeting, but if Kravash Garshul not able, good thing I know how speak English.
I mean, okay, that's fine, but, I mean, I kept trying to explain how ridiculous this whole situation was. I had to call Dixon and let him know what was going on, but I knew he was probably asleep now, the lazy bastard. I shook my head. I suppose that'll do then. They finally left my home, and I walked inside, ready to collapse and catch some sleep. The whole idea of these orcs wanting to all of a sudden have open talks, and the fact that only a handful were even learning English, it didn't seem like a good idea, but that wasn't my problem. Dixon could work that out. I just needed some rest. So needless to say, I was furious when I heard the sound of my door knocking. I growled angrily and turned over and covered my head. The door knocked louder. Go away, damn it. Crash! Holy shit! I rolled out of bed fast and staggered up in my boxers. I'd stripped out of my uniform and desperately went to grab for some pants and my handgun. Someone had broken into my house and I didn't want to be caught like this. But no sooner had I gotten on pants and run out to meet the threat than I saw it was no threat at all. Ashraka! She stood there, still in the same clothes I'd seen her in earlier. Her hood was up and she smiled at the sight of me. She looked me over and her grin broadened.
Built well. Muscles nice. Not orc. Can tell you not weak.
Ordinarily, I might have taken the compliment to my physical build with a bashful smile and hand wave, but right now I was too floored by this orc woman being in my home. What are you doing here? I thought you and your father went home.
I only take Kravash Garshul to airport, where he board bird home. I'm ordered stay and conduct talk.
So you're staying in Terra. What do you want from me then? Rent a hotel room or something. I'll call one for you.
What hotel? She asked.
I snarled angrily, fatigue making me forget my manners. Damn it, you stupid green bimbo! You show up on my doorstep in the middle of the night, and now you're breaking into my home in the early hours of the morning. I do not have time for this! I suddenly froze, realizing what I just said. I looked at Ashraka and backed up fast. Oh God! I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... I shouldn't have lost it like that.
What sorry for? She asked.
She didn't even look fazed, as if my words hadn't even bothered her. Aren't you angry? I just insulted you. I yelled at you. I'm sorry for doing that.
No sorry for insult, she smiled at me. For orc, insulting common, regular. English hard to learn because insults not so common. Took long time learn manners, she then beamed. It's stupid not speak mind. Say how feel. No hide behind kind words. You angry? Say you is angry.
I blinked at her a long time and she laughed at my expression.
Ha! So dumb, looking like bass fish when pulled from water.
You look like something I pulled out of my nose.
And you smell like ugly pigskin left rotting, she countered.
That's rich. You stink like dirty laundry in the sun.
Better than being toothless sapsucker Terran.
Rather a Terran than a giant green bean bitch. Her eyes widened at that, and then she burst out laughing, hugging her sides and howling.
Ortsuna Makraza! Oh, you're so funny.
I found myself smiling too. I let out a lot of horde of stress built up in my chest. I leaned over, breathing heavily. We stayed like that a long time, and then Ashraka sighed and brushed her hair back.
You seeing? Say what feel. No hide it.
Well, thanks. I needed that. But what I said before still stands. You need a place to stay if you're going to stay in Terra. Ashraka cocked her head a little and smiled.
That's why I here. I stay with you.
What? No, you can't do that.
Why not? Is home too small? I'm not minding it.
It's not about size. It's a huge conflict of interests.
Conflict?
She looked stunned, and suddenly there was a glint in her eyes as grin spread across her face.
Conflict is fight. Who I fight, I win.
Fight? No, fight? What are you talking about, fight?
If I cannot stay with you until fighting someone, then I fight. When honor stay in home, it is easy. No Terra human stronger than Ashraka throat ripper.
No, damn it, that's not what I meant. Look, sit down, I will try to explain it to you. I took her arm and led her to the living room and sat her down before launching into my explanation. Look, you're an Edenite, and I'm an ambassador's aide, meant to help negotiate your well-being in this land. If you're living in my home, it looks like we're showing favoritism to the orcs. We don't let other races move in with ambassadors or aides.
Oh, I'm thinking I see, she nodded. So no one other race think you like specific orc, yes?
Yes, that's right.
Because it make them think they not liked as much as me, she continued.
Exactly! I was thrilled she grasped it. She nodded and tapped her chin and then shrugged.
Well, no worry. If they make problem, I deal.
What? What?
No Eden race stronger than orc. If they challenge or argue to you, you say so, and I make them understand.
She raised her fist proudly and winked.
Won't let any dishonor Daniel Blackstone.
It's just Daniel, please, and that's not the point. You can't just go picking fights with others because they don't like you living here.
Why? If they have problem, then it is their problem. Not yours, not mine. If being problem to you, then it's my problem now, and then I deal with problem.
But it is my problem. I haven't given you permission to stay, I argued. You can't just invite yourself to stay in my home like this. It's not fair. At last, this seemed to sink in, and Ashraka's ears sank a bit.
Oh, you do not want me to stay because... Oh. I see. Yes, excuse.
She looked downcast and nodded.
I thought it... No, excuse. I'm sorry. Did not mean to...
She then stood up and bowed low in apology.
Forgive. Ashraka will find place to stay.
As she turned to leave, I felt a sudden grip of guilt clutch my throat, and I stood up. Wait, I called. She paused and turned to look at me. How about a deal instead?
Deal?
She asked. I had to think of the right way to do this. The best possible way that would appeal to this woman as the warrior she was. She had wanted to fight for the right to live in my house, so perhaps I could play to that. Maybe you can earn the honor to live here. The effect was flawless. She perked up and stood up straight, her ears wiggling and her eyes shining.
How I earn honor?
She smiled weakly and held up. I smiled weakly and held up my arm. Arm wrestle? I was lucky she didn't break my arm, but I felt it was worth it to see the smile on her face. To be honest, I was glad to have her in my home. She made me feel like I could actually speak my mind around her. And I told her more than once she smelled like old socks, which was true, though the smile on her face when she laughed at the insult was as bright as sunshine. I almost hoped that she might get to stay longer than the 8 days before the appointment. And that was that. All right.
So there is one other short Edenite story, but I'm not proud of it. It's not one that I think is great and probably needs some editing, so I probably won't read that one for now. But we got through all the others, which I'm very proud of. Very happy for that. Oh, boy. Reading all that time was hard on my throat. Still not 100%. Anyway, but I did better than I thought I would. Anyway, what did you guys think? I'll give you all a second to share your thoughts on the stories and on Edenite Chronicles. I'll give you about 5-10 minutes to do that, and then I'm going to close out the stream. So if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, ask away. Ask away. All right. Alrighty then. Yeah, you ship it, Hannah? I thought you might. Now, I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I actually read all these stories in order of release. So the very first story that I read, the Lamia Love story, was actually the very first one that I wrote for this series. And the last one I read, the orc one, is the most recent one. So you have heard them all in order that I have written them. Now, in answer to a question that I'm sure some of you are asking, will there be more? I plan to write more. I plan to write at least 4 or 5 more of these stories. Probably more if I come up with more ideas. But these are, at the end of the day, anthology stories. They are short stories that I am very happy to be working on. And it's a very cool universe that I've gotten to play with. Oh, I got a question from Aaron. He sent it through Discord. Okay. What is the Edenite story that you didn't like? Well, that was Staying Ahead. Staying Ahead was the one that I wasn't too fond of. That was I'm just not fond of that one because it feels way too similar to the Lamia Love story. So that's the one. I want to edit it to be a little bit better. That's all. So there's that. But anyway, any other questions? Monster Girl likes Monster Boy win? That might happen in a later one. But because this is sort of a story of Edenites meeting humanity, you know, and not all of these are love stories either, because keep in mind that in like the interview one with the Emperor of Elves, they're not getting together, and I didn't make the Queen of Bees fall in love and get with the Ambassador, so not all of them are love stories. And the teacher one too. The teacher one, there was no love story in that. I think the Lamia one was a love story, and no, the cop one wasn't a love story either. Shoot, I think the Lamia love story was the only one where I blatantly said it was a love story. Although you could argue that the orc one could have been. But anyway, I think that's about it. I think that most people are kind of checked out now, and I'm definitely worn out. So I'm going to go ahead and call it there. All right, guys. Tomorrow, we can go ahead and say it. Tomorrow is the stream. Tomorrow is the Warriors in live stream. I will be streaming it. I'm going to be starting early at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you want to join me for the live stream, hop on at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll be hanging out for a little bit, and it'll be fun. Can it be a muscle girl tomboy and a stoic half giant boy? I don't know. I haven't thought about it that far yet. We'll figure it out. But anyway, look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow, and we will probably stream that evening. It'll be an earlier stream, probably around 5:30, 6 o'clock, something like that. And it'll probably be Dead by Daylight. So look forward to that. Really excited. And that's all the time we got. Thank you guys so much. And as always, I will see you in my next video. Take care.